Chapter 922. 3,000 years ago, when Li Yundong and the others were involved in the War of God's investiture, in Dongwu City 3,000 years later, the representatives of the Japanese cultivation world and the major conglomerates were walking through a dark and damp stone path. The cultivators of various sects in Japan had traveled thousands of miles to find Li Yundong, but they had been rejected twice in a row. How could they be willing to give up? Naturally, they had to find Li Yundong's whereabouts and see him in person before they were willing to go back. Otherwise, it would be strange if they didn't be laughed at after coming here with so many people and going back empty-handed. Although this was China, the home ground of these Japanese people, there were Japanese enterprises everywhere, and there were a large number of them in Dongwu City. If they wanted to find a person, although they didn't have to go to the highest heaven and earth, it was easy to find out what kind of business this person had and where he went. As the saying goes, money can communicate with the gods, and so can spiritual power. These Japanese people had money and spiritual power, and they had their own unique magic skills. After searching for a while, they found the whereabouts of Li Yundong and the others. When they arrived at Mount Tianlong, they found that there was a faint spiritual qi in Mount Tianlong, but they couldn't see where it came from. After carefully looking around, Ise Shenguang concluded that Li Yundong and the others must be in this mountain. The Japanese had built a cultivation place in the mountain many times. When the monks of Mount Koya entered the Okunohara to cultivate, they would choose to seclude themselves in a stone cave that was almost completely closed. They would fast for 3 months without eating, drinking, or defecating. In short, they would never move their buttocks. They would either become a pile of rotten meat and be carried out, or they would become a generation of divine monks and come out of seclusion with dignity. Therefore, as soon as Ise Shenguang pointed out this point, the cultivators of all sects in Japan also agreed. Although these Japanese cultivators were not top cultivators like the mystical Silver Fox or Li Yundong, they were all great experts and masters. They began to search for Li Yundong with ease. For a time, there was a gust of cold wind on Mount Tianlong, and the Shikigami and Shikigami ran around, scaring the few tourists on the mountain and at the foot of the mountain. Ise Shenguang immediately stopped those guys and scolded. "How dare you? This is China. Do you think you're in your own country?" These cultivators had no choice but to withdraw their magic and recommend Ise Chuyun to use magic alone to find the whereabouts of Li Yunyang and the others. When Ise Izumo cast spells alone, the commotion was not as big as when a group of people cast spells. It was just that she practiced the Ise Shinto, and no matter which school of Shintoism it was, their spells were always summoning the gods and summoning the ghosts. This time, they didn't come to China to fight, but to worship the gods. Naturally, they couldn't summon the gods of Shintoism. Otherwise, it would be inappropriate to see who was stronger and who was weaker. Thus, Ise Izumo naturally summoned Suzuhiko Haim, one of the Japanese ghosts. Suzuhiko Haim was one of the few ghosts in Japan that was beautiful, gorgeous, and harmless to people. At that time, Amaterasu Okami hid in the Rock of Heaven and refused to come out. It was Suzuhiko Haim who danced naked outside the cave with the divine umbrella in her hand. Only then did Amaterasu Okami come out. Not only did Suzuhiko Haim have the ability to seduce people, but she also had the ability to find people. Ise Izumo controlled Suzuhiko Haim and led everyone to the entrance of the cave at the back of the mountain where the secret chamber of the Fox Zen School was located. Suzuhiko Haim's spiritual power was not high. Apart from dancing erotically, seducing a man, or finding a few people, there was no other use for her. Japanese people were utilitarian, especially cultivators. Who would be willing to spend time to learn the magic to summon Suzuhiko Haim? It was because Ise Izumo was too beautiful. As a beauty, even though she was usually a little cold, she still had the heart of an ordinary woman who loved beauty. Naturally, she was more interested in those beautiful and dazzling things. Everyone saw that Suzuhiko Haim was holding a red oil paper umbrella with gold rims and wearing a red kimono. Her clothes were half off, and she was half naked. Her shoulders were like warm fragrant jade, and her breasts were like steamed buns. Her bare feet were as white as snow, and there were even ripples on the ground as she stepped on it. Every step she took was like dancing, and her long sleeves fluttered in the wind. Even in this dark, damp, cold and closed stone path, there was a decadent aura that made people's hearts itch. Many of the people present were cultivators with great cultivation quotients. When they saw Suzuhiko Haim walking all the way and dancing erotically, they couldn't stand it and stared at her. Even Tanaka Misa, the heiress of the Tanaka Consortium, was also excited. She thought to herself, No wonder Amaterasu god saw Suzuhiko Haim dancing and walking out of the Rock of Heaven. Today, she really deserves her reputation. The most important thing was that Suzuhiko Haim took off her clothes as she walked. The more she walked, the more she took off. In the end, she was almost naked, which really made everyone blush. Ise Shunguang was also very uncomfortable. He coughed dryly and said to Ise Izumo in a low voice, "Izumo, can you take this shikigami away?" Ise Izumo raised his eyebrows and looked at Ise Shunguang with a faint smile, as if he was mocking his calmness. These days, Ise Izumo had recalled the scene of Li Yunyang fighting with the mystical silver fox, and he had also devoted himself to reading a lot of Chinese Taoist cultivation classics. Although his cultivation quotient had not increased greatly, his realm had indeed improved a lot. He had seen through the beauty of the secular world. There was no beautiful woman in his eyes, only the realm of pink skeletons. But when Suzuhiko Haim finally walked to the huge stone cave, everyone's eyes suddenly opened up, and a dazzling five-colored light shone out of the stone room. Everyone took a closer look and saw a woman in a long white dress floating in the air with the azure glass mirror in her hand. The woman's long dress was fluttering, and her black hair was fluttering without any wind. She was like a fairy in heaven. Her ethereal immortal chi and beautiful face made people marvel and awe. They didn't dare to have the slightest intention of blaspheming her. Ise Shunguang and the others recognized that this woman was Fairy Zi Yuan, one of the three immortals fighting celestial foxes. At this time, Zi Yuan's body was surrounded by five-colored divine light, as if she was in an auspicious cloud, mysterious and serene. Her temperament was extremely outstanding. After the battle with Su Yi, her cultivation quotient had increased again, and her ethereal aura had become more and more heavy. At this time, she was using all her strength to cast spells, and there was a kind of awe-inspiring immortal chi all over her body. Even Suzuhiko Haim, who had attracted everyone's attention with her erotic dance, felt so inferior that she shrank into a ball and got into the oil paper umbrella she was holding when she saw the awe-inspiring Zi Yuan. The oil paper umbrella fell in mid-air, and Ise Izumo reached out to catch it. With a flip of his wrist, he put it away. When she saw Zi Yuan holding the azure glass mirror in mid-air and casting spells, she was shocked and thought to herself, "Is Zi Yuan fairy casting spells to destroy the mystical silver fox?" All the Japanese cultivators present recognized the sky-glazed mirror, and their thoughts were similar to those of the Yun nation. Therefore, none of them dared to speak or take a deep breath. Tanaka Misa, who had come to watch the fun, also looked at Zi Yuan in shock. She couldn't believe that there was a woman in the world who could surpass Ise Izumo in terms of ethereal temperament and beauty. Tanaka Misa looked at the scene with her mouth agape. She saw a bald monk not far away from Zi Yuan. This monk was different from the monks in Japan. He didn't wear a monk's robe, nor did he wear Buddha beads, nor did he carry any magical items. The monk just pinched his fingers, closed his eyes, and moved his mouth quickly, as if he was chanting scriptures. In front of him, there was a purple gold jade plate spinning in the air, and a huge oval halo slowly appeared above the jade plate. The halo appeared with a buzz, and in an instant, a black vortex appeared. From the vortex, an imperial jade seal flew out with a bang. The imperial jade seal hit the rock at the entrance of the stone path that had been blocked by Li Yunyang like a cannonball, shattering the heavy rock. Then, it flew far away, across the sky, and no one knew where it had flown to. This change shocked these Japanese cultivators. While they were stunned and dazzled, they saw a few more figures fly out in the blink of an eye. It was Ruan Hongling and Lin Miao who flew out and fell to the ground. Then, a beautiful woman flew out. She was covered in golden light, which could not be underestimated. The Japanese cultivators recognized the woman at once. She was the human immortal Zhou Qin in the battle of three immortals fighting the heavenly fox. As soon as Zhou Qin landed, she looked up nervously. At this time, a huge golden foxtail quickly rushed out of the rotating black hole, like the tentacles of an octopus. This almost scared the Japanese cultivators out of their wits. Ise Izumo was so frightened that he couldn't help shouting, "Tamamona! She's not dead!" The Japanese cultivators immediately took out their powerful magical weapons. All of them looked nervous and tragic. They knew that fighting with the mystical silver fox in such a narrow space was simply courting death. But before they could make a move, all the golden foxtails rushed out in an instant. It was the mystical silver fox with 9 golden foxtails. When the Japanese cultivators saw this, their legs almost trembled. They knew that the mystical silver fox, who had killed them in Xueqi before, only had 7 golden foxtails. Now she already had 9. What did this mean? The Japanese cultivators' faces turned ashen, and their eyes were filled with despair. The mystical silver fox quickly glanced around in midair, and finally her eyes fell on Su-chan. She let out a shrill roar and immediately flew towards Su-chan's body in a flash. As soon as she came out, Li Yunyang also came out of the black hole in an instant. He shouted and chased after the figure of the mystical silver fox. He roared, "Mystical silver fox, how dare you!" As he said that, he slapped her with his palm. But after all, he was a little slower. At this time, the mystical silver fox had already entered Su-chan's body. At this time, the mystical silver fox opened her eyes and stared at Li Yundong with a pair of red eyes. Her black hair danced wildly, and the 9 golden foxtails behind her twisted like strange flames. She laughed wildly and said, "Hit me. If you have the ability, hit me. Do you dare to hit me?" Li Yundong was furious. His body trembled and he shouted loudly, "Choner, can you hear me? Don't give up. You can't be defeated by the mystical silver fox. You promised me that you would die with me." The mystical silver fox's face suddenly froze, and then her expression became distorted and she began to struggle. Little by little, she became painful and uncomfortable. When she opened her mouth again, it was Su-chan's voice. "Yundong. I feel so bad, I feel so bad." Without saying a word, Li Yundong immediately pointed at Su-chan's body with both hands. With a few puffs, he pointed at several key acupoints on Su-chan's body. Li Yundong pressed his palm on Su-chan's forehead and recited the scriptures loudly. Su-chan's body stiffened, and the painful expression on her face slowly calmed down. The 9 golden foxtails behind her also slowly retracted and finally disappeared. At this time, not only the Japanese were stunned, but Zi Yuan, who had been casting spells, was also stunned by this scene. She opened her mouth but didn't know what to say. Not only her, but Zhou Qin, Wan Hongling, and the others were also dumbfounded as they looked at Li Yundong, who was casting spells and chanting scriptures. They were speechless. On the other hand, Tanaka Misa looked at the field with her mouth agape. She couldn't help saying, What the hell is going on? This is the update on the 22nd. I'm sorry, there are too many things to do. It didn't finish until after 11:30, and I started to write. Chapter 923. The Japanese people's fear of the mystical silver fox had penetrated deep into their bones and souls. They were not fools. Although they did not immediately realize what was going on here, when they heard that Li Yundong was reciting the Surangama Sutra, how could they not understand? The great Buddha had cultivated the Surangama Sutra, the first of the 10,000 actions of the righteous Bodhisattva. This sutra was a famous classic work of Buddhism. The ancients once said, "Since the first Surangama, I have not read the trash books of the human world." Compared with other Buddhist classics, the biggest difference between this sutra and other Buddhist classics was that this sutra itself was one of the most powerful magic treasures of Buddhism. It was the most famous devil-breaking sutra. Most of the other Buddhist sutras talked about the principles of cultivation, the theoretical knowledge of various sects, and the understanding of the mysteries of the universe. This sutra could be called the encyclopedia of Buddhist cultivation. Its content included the important mysteries of manifestation, secret, nature, and other aspects. In terms of sects, it spanned Zen sect, Pure Land sect, Tantra sect, Vinaya sect, and many other sections. It explained all the mortal saint realms in detail. Finally, it opened up the 5 Een devil realms and explained in detail how to break devils. It was also because of this that the Surangama Sutra became a common cultivation book that surpassed the 3 cultivation sects of Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism. Because this sutra recorded all kinds of natural laws in the Dharma ending age, and it was very thorough and clear, the Buddha also pointed out the way to deal with it in the sutra. Therefore, the Buddha said in the sutra, when the Dharma ending age is coming to an end and the Dharma is about to be destroyed, the Surangama Sutra will be the first to be destroyed, because the Surangama Sutra is the nemesis of all devils and a magic treasure to break devils. If the sutra lived in the world, the righteous Dharma would be able to stay in the world. The disciples of Buddhism would have something to rely on in their cultivation, and the devils would not be able to succeed. However, if the sutra was destroyed, there would be no one who could control the devil power. The devil would be rampant, and few living beings could cultivate without falling into the devil. Such a sutra was studied not only by Buddhist cultivators, but also by Taoist and Confucian cultivators in China. As for the cultivators of various sects in Japan, after the Sarangama Sutra was introduced into their country, they regarded it as a treasure. Almost every cultivator had a copy of the Sarangama Sutra in their home. Therefore, when Li Yundong recited the Sarangama Sutra, these Japanese knew that Li Yundong was subduing demons. In particular, when they saw the nine-tailed fox get into Su Chan's body, they understood that the mystical silver fox had now occupied the body of Su Chan, one of the three immortals, and was trying to reappear in the world. This frightened the Japanese cultivators. Immediately, a Japanese cultivator roared and rushed towards Su Chan. The magic treasures in his hands smashed toward the back of Su Chan's head. At that moment, Li Yundong was reciting the first Rama Samadhi, Qin Yen Jian Xiang. Knowing the depth of the Samadhi is like a general knowing the number of his troops. Once again, the Bodhisattva has Samadhi, and all the demons and devils are incompetent and bad. For example, the Chakravarti Saint King is in charge of the soldiers and generals. Wherever he goes, he will be subdued. Just as he felt that the demon aura in Su Chan's body was beginning to be suppressed, he saw these Japanese people pouncing on him, trying to kill Su Chan to get rid of future troubles. He immediately flew into a rage. At this time, one of Li Yundong's hands was standing in front of his chest, holding the one-handed Mahamudra, and the other hand was pressed on Su Chan's forehead. He couldn't deal with these Japanese cultivators at all. But in his rage, a vertical pupil split open between his eyebrows, and his eyes spewed out a fiery gaze. The muscles on his back bulged quickly, and his bones crackled, and 4 arms grew out. These 4 arms grabbed in the air, and immediately, the Bahuang and Liuha appeared in the hands of 2 of them. The burning thumb pot also appeared in the hands of the other 2 arms. One hand held the pot, and the other reached out to flick it. With a crisp sound, the burning thumb pot immediately spread out a white halo, which made the Japanese cultivators who had rushed up feel as if they had been pushed by a pair of invisible giant hands. Their bodies shook, and they flew back and hit the stone wall hard. These cultivators were not weak, and the lowest one was a Jinshin master. However, Li Yundong's anger was so powerful that these Japanese people were so scared that they froze in place and didn't dare to move again. Tanaka Misha stared at Li Yundong with her eyes wide open and couldn't help exclaiming in a low voice, "Wisdom King's true body, this is Wisdom King's true body." As she spoke, she saw that no one was paying attention to her, so she turned her head to look at her close friend, Chiyun. She pulled Chiyun's arm and whispered, "This Li Yundong is really the reincarnation of Wisdom King." Of course, Essie Izumo knew this. She looked at Li Yunyang in horror and didn't care to talk to Tanaka Misa. She said loudly, "Wisdom King, are you going to protect this demon fox?" The cultivators of the other sects in Japan also exclaimed, "Your Highness, do you want the tragedy to repeat itself? Your Highness, you can't be soft-hearted. Your Highness, if you can't do it, please let us do it." These Japanese people were begging. Some of them even knelt on the ground and kowtowed like pounding garlic, crying loudly. Zi Yuan, who was in midair, also came to her senses at this time. She saw that Li Yundong was using the Sarangama Sutra to try to suppress the mystical silver fox in Su Chan's body. But these Japanese people were making Li Yundong's anger grow stronger and stronger. She was shocked and couldn't help but be anxious. Zi Yuan was familiar with the Buddhist scriptures, so she naturally knew that the current situation was exactly the evil appearance mentioned in the Sarangama Sutra. The scripture said, "Study the extreme with this heart. See the good knowledge change the body. Choose less all kinds of changes for no reason. This evil heart contains evil spirits. Or let the sky devil enter one's heart." There is no reason to say it, but it is clear and wonderful. It is not the holy proof. If you don't do it, the devil will stop. If you do it, you will be subjected to evil spirits. It referred to the situation in front of them. If they wanted to break such a dharma, the person's heart must be pure and unhindered. There must be no idiocy, no likes and dislikes, no killing intent, no anger, no greed, no sorrow or joy. Once their emotions were stirred, they would be taken advantage of by the sky devil. If these Japanese people were to provoke Li Yundong like this, it would be counterproductive. Zi Yuan immediately moved and stood in front of Li Yundong. She turned her head and said to Li Yundong, "We are here. You can focus on the practice." When Li Yundong saw her appear in front of him, he immediately felt relieved. The vertical eye between his eyebrows slowly closed, and his angry expression gradually calmed down. The hand behind his back also retracted, and the powerful magical weapon floated in the air, automatically protecting him. The Japanese cultivators saw Zi Yuan standing in front of them. Although they were respectful, the mystical silver fox was related to the life and death of the Japanese cultivation world. How could they dare to be careless? At that moment, a Japanese cultivator said loudly, "Zi Yuan Fairy, you are blocking our way. Are you also going to protect the mystical silver fox?" Zi Yuan was not surprised. She said in a deep voice, "Now the outcome has not been decided. We don't even know whether she is a saint or a devil. How can we protect her?" As soon as she finished speaking, a Japanese cultivator said anxiously, "What if she loses? Who can control her? If His Highness Wisdom King doesn't make a move now, he will regret it in the future." As soon as this was said, the Japanese cultivators suddenly became excited. "Yes, that's right. If we don't make a move now, there will be a big disaster in the future. Sacrificing this woman in exchange for peace and happiness in the world, I think His Highness Wisdom King can understand this truth. Buddha also said that if I don't go to hell, who will go to hell?" Facing the criticism of so many cultivators, Zi Yuan was under great pressure. She gritted her teeth and was about to speak, but she heard Zhou Qin shout angrily, "Bullshit! What bullshit? If I don't go to hell, who will go to hell? Since you've said so, why don't you go to hell and have a look first?" The Japanese cultivator who had spoken was also very straightforward. He knelt on the ground, pulled open his clothes, and revealed his abdomen. He glared at Zhou Qin and said, "If my life can be exchanged for His Highness Wisdom King to show his bodhisattva's kindness with thunderous means, why should I cherish my life? Everyone, I'll go first." After that, he shouted loudly and cut his abdomen with his palm like a knife. The Japanese cultivators on the side were all shocked. Ise Shengguang hurriedly stopped him and advised, "Sumitomo, calm down. You can't do this." In the end, Sumitomo was a little faster. Although he was stopped by the cultivators next to him, he still pierced his belly with his fingers, and blood flowed out. The people next to him dragged him to the back to treat his wounds. He still shouted at Li Yunyang loudly, "Your Highness Wisdom King, you have to show your bodhisattva's kindness with thunderous means. She is a demon, and you are a human. It is your duty to subdue demons." At this time, many Japanese cultivators couldn't help but kneel down together and say loudly, "His Highness Wisdom King, please think twice. Your Highness, what's so pitiful about this demoness? Could it be that the lives of so many of us aren't worth her life? Even if we can't, what about the people in the world? When the nine-tailed celestial fox descends, there will be a great disaster. Your Highness, be careful." These people had come to China to pay homage to the immovable Wisdom King. Who knew that they would see such a terrifying scene? They couldn't sit still. Even Ise Shengguang knelt down and begged bitterly, "Wisdom King, she is no longer the woman you love. Open your eyes and take a look." Although Zhou Qin and Zi Yuan were both lightning retribution masters, there were also many lightning retribution masters among these Japanese. Moreover, with so many people shouting at the same time, the momentum was really great. The two of them were under great pressure, and a thin layer of sweat appeared on their foreheads. The two of them looked at each other and were about to speak when they suddenly heard Li Yundong's low and slow voice say, "Don't say any more. The lives of all the people in the world added together are not as valuable as her life. If any of you say that killing her to save the world again, I will kill you first." These words made the hearts of these Japanese fall to the bottom. They felt that they had come in high spirits, but they had ended up in such a situation. Their enthusiasm was simply cold to the bottom. The ancient said, "Those who are not of our race must have a different heart." This meant that when different groups encountered a crisis, because of different backgrounds, different status, and different interests, the results would lead to different ways of thinking and acting. These Japanese cultivators naturally didn't know the relationship between Li Yundong and Su Chan. They only felt that sacrificing Su Chan, a woman, to save the world was a worthwhile thing, but the wise king insisted on going his own way. When these Japanese heard Li Yundong's words, they looked at each other and didn't say anything more. They turned around and left in silence. Tanaka Misa looked at Issei Chuyun, who had an ugly expression on his face, and followed her out. As she walked, she looked back and asked in a low voice, "What's wrong? Are we going back?" Issei Chuyun was silent for a long time before he said slowly, A great disaster is coming. What else can we do but leave? When Ziyuan, Zhou Qin, and the others saw the Japanese retreating, they all looked at Li Yundong worriedly and said, "What should we do? These Japanese will definitely not let it go." Li Yundong's face was cold and he said in a deep voice, "Let them come." Wu Hua, who had been silent and watching coldly, suddenly chanted the name of Buddha and said, "Amitabha, very good." After that, he laughed and slowly walked out of the stone exit that had been created by the flipping sky seal. After a while, he disappeared. Chapter 924. After the Japanese cultivators left the Tianlong mountain, they were all silent. Compared with their previous enthusiasm, they were more interested in reading books. Xueqi said that human nature was evil, and he pointed out that people were born greedy and selfish. This nature did not differ because of the country, race, gender, and age. Although the Japanese cultivators praised Li Jiandong highly, once they encountered a real crisis and needed to make a choice, the nature of human beings and the interests of their respective camps would be different. After they got down from Mount Tianlong, a monk of the Tiantai sect sighed and said, "The wise king is determined to go his own way. What should we do? If he really succeeds in suppressing the mystical silver fox, it's fine. But what if he fails?" As soon as he said this, the others all said, "Yes, the fate of our Japanese cultivation world is completely in the hands of the wise king. Our lives are not a concern, but listen to me, if the wise king fails and the mystical silver fox returns to her heyday, our Japanese cultivation world will definitely face a disaster. At that time, even if we are lucky enough to go to the earth or the sky, how can we face the ancestors of all generations? This is the death of our Japanese cultivation world." These Japanese cultivators were all famous figures in Japan. Any one of them would be highly sought after when they went out. At this time, they were standing at the foot of this unknown Mount Tianlong, sighing and frowning, as if the end of the world was coming in the next second. If it was an ordinary person, they wouldn't have been so worried. Without saying a word, they would have rushed over with their sabers, regardless of whether the other party agreed or not. However, this person was Li Jiandong, and he was also the reincarnated Wisdom King. He had defeated the Japanese cultivation world twice in a row, and he had defeated the mystical silver fox in front of almost all the Japanese cultivators. He was a powerful master. In the past, the Japanese cultivation world didn't even pay attention to Wang Yuanshan. However, after the battle with Su Yi, the Japanese cultivation world was shocked by the deep foundation of the Chinese cultivation world. They were all shocked and recognized Wang Yuanshan as the #1 master of the Chinese Zhengyi school and the master of cultivation. Zhou Fachang was recognized as the #1 master of the Chinese Chuanzhen sect and the great master of cultivation. At the same time, they recognized Li Jiandong's strength as the #1 master of China and the fighting heavenly master. In Japan, a country with many cultivation sects, it was extremely rare to be recognized like this without writing a book. Although the Japanese martial arts world was inherited from China, the turmoil in the early days of the founding of New China led to the death of a large number of masters in the turmoil. Among them, the tragedy of Xueqi, the Xingyi grandmaster, caused a large number of martial arts masters to flee. The last disciple of Li Shuwen, Lu Yunqiao, led the way to Taiwan. Such a situation had led to a great decline in the strength of the Chinese martial arts world, so much so that the Japanese martial arts world once thought that there were no actual combat skills in the Chinese martial arts world, because most of the actual combat experts had been raised and had become toothless tigers. The martial artists with actual combat ability had all left for other countries. In the 1980s, Matsuda Takashi, a famous Japanese martial arts scholar, came to China for martial arts exchange. After returning to China, he and the cartoonist Fujiwara Yoshihide created the cartoon fist that caused a sensation in Japan. The Japanese cartoon industry was so developed that ordinary people couldn't imagine it. As soon as this extremely professional cartoon was published, it immediately caused a great success and sensation, especially attracted the attention of the Japanese martial arts world. This cartoon concentrated on the fighting methods and fighting skills of China's Bajiquan. In the cartoon, Bajiquan was praised as the first boxing method in China. Therefore, there was a saying in Japan that the only boxing method in China with actual combat power is Bajiquan, that spread like wildfire. The martial arts world and the cultivation world were closely related, and the relationship between the two was inseparable. This was the same in both China and Japan. In this era of extremely developed consultation, if one wanted to become famous, especially to be recognized by almost all cultivators, it was extremely important to write a book and establish a theory. In Japan, even if a person had the strength and qualifications of a great master, no one would write a book and promote him. No matter how powerful he was, the Japanese would not recognize him. However, no one wrote a book for Li Yundong at all, but he was recognized by the entire Japanese cultivation world. From this matter, it could be seen that the Japanese cultivation world's reverence for Li Yundong had reached an extreme. It was because of this reverence that they were in so much pain now. It was as if they had gone through all kinds of hardships to think that they could cozy up to the reincarnated Wisdom King, only to find out in the end that this guy turned out to be the hidden big boss, who was actually their enemy. This time, these Japanese were really scared out of their wits. Even Xueqi and Xueqi, two cultivators who had always admired and respected Li Yundong, couldn't help but be silent. It was one thing to admire and respect a person, but it was another thing if that person threatened their own interests or even their own safety. Xueqi didn't have the slightest carelessness on his face. His face was full of worry. He sighed and said, "Everyone, Wisdom King's behavior is indeed a little impulsive, but we can't just sit back and wait for death." Although Xueqi admired Li Yundong very much, he was now one of the leaders of the Japanese cultivation world and the great priest of Xueqi. His actions, words, and thoughts naturally had to be considered from the perspective of Xueqi and the Japanese cultivation world. Personal factors had to be put aside. It could even be said that if his parents threatened the safety of the Japanese cultivation world, he would probably only be able to grit his teeth and kill his family in the name of righteousness. This was the saying that one's position determined one's brain, and one's position determined one's thinking. When the other Japanese cultivators heard Xueqi's words, they couldn't help but ask, "Xueqi, do you have any good ideas?" F***CK, the immovable Wisdom King is so powerful and stubborn. We want to persuade him to stop, but he doesn't care about us and we can't beat him. What can we do? Xueqi thought for a moment and said with a serious expression, "Everyone, we don't want to be enemies with Wisdom King, but what he is doing now has threatened the safety of the Japanese cultivation world and even the Chinese cultivation world. I believe that even the cultivators of other sects in the Chinese cultivation world will not let Wisdom King act so stubbornly." When the other cultivators heard this, they were suddenly enlightened and overjoyed. Yes, it's a good idea to use China to control China. Xueqi glanced at Xueqi with a worried expression and said in a low voice, "Xueqi, will the Chinese cultivators think that we have other plans?" Xueqi smiled bitterly and said, "In the face of a great enemy, how can there be any difference between countries and sects? I don't believe that the cultivators of the Chinese cultivation world will watch the reincarnated Wisdom King gamble with the life and death of the Chinese cultivation world and the Japanese cultivation world. As the saying goes, how can others sleep peacefully on the side of the bed?" No one was willing to put their lives in the hands of others, even if that person had a good reputation and was powerful. But when people encountered a problem of life and death, they couldn't help but think, what if his temperament changed greatly and he changed from a good person to a bad person? What if the reincarnated Wisdom King failed and the mystical silver fox won? It was better to hold one's own life in one's own hands. Xueqi's words made the cultivators of all sects in Japan feel relieved and they all returned home. Although Tanaka Misha had been with Xueqi for a long time and knew some things about the cultivation world, she was not as aware of the harm in this matter as other cultivators. Moreover, she was in the prime of her life. Most girls at this age were in love. Just now, she had seen Li Yundong's unparalleled spirit and momentum, and he had protected Su Chan at all costs. She couldn't help but feel a little emotional in her heart. On the way back home, she said to Xueqi, "Li Yundong is a real hero at first glance. Do you really want to deal with such a hero?" Xueqi's expression showed a rare trace of helplessness and tiredness. She leaned against the window of the plane and looked at the vast sea of clouds below. She said softly, "Misha, when I first saw him, I also felt that he must be a great hero among the Chinese cultivators. In the future, he will definitely have earth-shattering cultivation. But, even if he is a great hero, he can't gamble with the lives of all the people in the world." Xueqi seemed to think of the terrifying and bloody scene of the battle in Susano. There was a faint trace of fear in her eyes. She said, "The mystical silver fox has now restored her nine-tailed true body. If she is allowed to occupy the body of Fox Fairy Su Chan, I'm afraid that even the reincarnation of Wisdom King won't be able to stop her. Moreover, Wisdom King has come to Japan with Fox Fairy Su Chan several times. The two of them are intimate. Obviously, they are a couple. If the mystical silver fox really occupies this body in the future, I'm afraid that Wisdom King won't be able to do it at all. Tanaka Misha didn't say anything. Although she admired Li Yundong, if she had to pay with her life, it would be better to decline. She thought for a moment and said, "Then when we go back, are we going to encourage other sects in the Chinese cultivation world to deal with the reincarnation of Wisdom King with us?" IC Chumo sighed, shook his head, and said, "Our Japanese cultivation world can't even defeat the nine-tailed celestial fox who is not in her peak state. How can we defeat the reincarnation of Wisdom King who defeated the mystical silver fox? An expert like the revered Wisdom King is not someone we can deal with. The only thing we can do is to unite with the Chinese cultivation sects and put pressure on Wisdom King together. I hope that he will be afraid under the heavy pressure and change his mind." After Tanaka Misa heard this, her eyes looked out of the window, lost in thought. As a woman, as a beautiful woman who yearned for love, how she hoped that there would be a man in this world who would protect and love her without reservation. But was there really a man in the world who could risk the pressure and risk of going against everyone in the world to protect a woman? Tanaka Misha fell silent. She thought to herself, once the Chinese and Japanese cultivation world join hands to put pressure on Li Yundong, can he withstand it? In the face of the criticism and pressure of the whole cultivation world, if Li Yundong doesn't put his family before his family, I'm afraid that everything he has done in the past will disappear. He will become the public enemy of the cultivation world. His reputation will be ruined, and he may even be infamous for thousands of years. Faced with such pressure, what would he choose? Chapter 925. Jiangsu City, Jiangxi Province. Wang Jinyuan stood in front of the cold and cheerless Chongzhen Palace with his hands behind his back. He silently looked at the gate tower and the archway, which were overgrown with weeds. He stretched out his hand and stroked the plaque engraved with words on the door. As soon as he touched it, the paint on it fell off, revealing the cracked and dry wooden board inside. It gave off an ancient feeling of vicissitudes and desolation. Wang Jinyuan stared at the wooden board with a complicated look in his eyes. His fingers gently stroked the cracks on it without saying a word. Yu Tian, who was at the side, looked at him and asked cautiously, "Sect Master Wan, I used to think that your external alchemy sect was rich and powerful, and the ancestral court would definitely have a lot of followers. I didn't expect." He didn't dare to continue. Wang Jinyuan glanced at him and smiled slightly. "It's incredible to see the ancestral court of our external alchemy sect decline like this, right?" Yu Tian smiled awkwardly and didn't answer. Wang Jinyuan sighed softly and said, "Since ancient times, the disputes in Jianghu in the cultivation world have never stopped. Whether it was the Tang, Song, Yuan, Ming, or Qing dynasty, ancient times or modern times, it has never changed. On the surface, the Zhengyi school is the strongest in the Chinese cultivation world, and the Chuanzhen sect is fighting with the other 5 sections. But in fact, these sects are on guard against each other. The Naidan sect is guarding against the external alchemy sect, and the sects in the north are hostile to the sects in the south. Hey, the battle between the north and the south, as well as the internal and external conflicts, is getting fiercer and fiercer. Although the sects such as the Zhengyi school and the Chuanzhen sect usually fight fiercely, when it comes to dealing with our external alchemy sect, they can reach a consensus and deal with us together. If the Zhengyi school and the Chuanzhen sect join forces, no matter how powerful we are, we will have to avoid them for the time being." Wang Jinyuan shook his head and said in a deep voice, "Under the suppression of the Naidan sect, our external alchemy sect looks very glorious. But in fact, if there are really good cultivators who want to cultivate, they will go to Mount Longhu or Mount Wudong. They will either join the Zhengyi school or the Chuanzhen sect. How could anyone join our Gazao sect?" Yu Tian was deeply moved as he listened. Although he had never had any ambition, his wife often wanted to revitalize the Panglai sect. It was just that the time and conditions were not ripe, so she did not show it. However, Yu Tian lived with her every day, and under the influence of what he saw and heard, he began to pay more attention to these things. Yu Tian said with emotion, "I thought that only our Panglai sect would be excluded. That's why we have such difficulties. I didn't expect that the leading sect of external alchemy would also be suppressed like this." Wang Jinyuan chuckled. "Zhen Renyu, you must be joking. Your Panglai sect has the advantage of the right time and the right place. There are many people in China who don't know about the Panglai sect. But there are very few people who don't know Mount Panglai." Wang Jinyuan raised his eyes and said with emotion, "It's not like our Mount Gazao. After the most glorious period passed, there was no chance for us to make a comeback. Yu Yutian glanced at Wang Jinyuan and said, Master Wan, I believe that one day, the Gazao sect will definitely rise again under your leadership. Wang Jinyuan smiled, glanced at Yu Yutian, and said, Thanks to your auspicious words, I also believe that such a day will come. Moreover, now the opportunity has come. It's not only an opportunity for me, but also for you, Zhenren Yu. Yu Yutian had not left his house these days. He had been cultivating all day, and he almost didn't pay attention to the outside world. He only read the cultivation book. He didn't know that Lu Yi had been killed by Wang Jinyuan, nor did he know what earth-shattering event had happened in the cultivation world. Yu Yutian looked at Wang Jinyuan strangely and asked, What do you mean by that, Master Wan? Wang Jinyuan chuckled and said, Zhenren Yu, come down the mountain with me. Soon, you will have a chance to show off. As long as you seize this opportunity, you will definitely get your revenge. Moreover, the reputation of the Penglai sect will also soar because of what you have done. Yu Yutian immediately clenched his fists and his breathing became rapid. Master Wan, are you going to help me get revenge? Wang Jinyuan smiled and said, Yes, I thought that your hope of revenge in this life was slim, but I didn't expect that this opportunity would come so soon and so suddenly. Yu Youqian's eyes were filled with a morbid and ecstasy. Master Wan, can you defeat Li Yunyang? Wang Jinyuan laughed and said, Defeat the reincarnated Wisdom King? Are you kidding me? But, Zhenren Yu, you have to remember that the one with the biggest fist in the world will not be the one who laughs in the end. There is another kind of power in this world that you have not seen, but I believe that you will soon be able to see it. Wang Jinyuan put his hands behind his back and looked at the sky with a sigh. He murmured softly, You have to remember that if you want to become stronger, you have to keep stepping on the corpses of others to climb up. Yu Yutian looked at Wang Jinyuan from the side. Although he was confused, his eyes became more and more excited. At the same time, in the Qingqing sect of Mount Qingqing. On this day, Zhang Tongtian, the leader of the Qingqing sect, was explaining the cultivation method to the disciples in the hall of the Laojun Pavilion. Just as he was talking about the mystery, he heard a voice like a broken gong shouting loudly. Senior brother leader. Senior brother leader. Zhang Huashuai, who was known as Fierce Zhang Fabe in the cultivation world, shouted loudly before entering the Laojun Pavilion. Zhang Tongtian frowned, raised his eyes, and looked outside unhappily. He turned to the disciple next to him and said kindly, You can go down first. When you go back, try to understand the realm I just mentioned. The disciples of the Qingqing sect got up and left one after another. When they walked to the door, they happened to see Zhang Huashuai rushing in. They bowed to him one by one, called him Shu, and then filed out. Zhang Tongtian frowned at Zhang Huashuai and said in a deep voice, Can't you see that I'm in class? What has caused such a ruckus? Zhang Huashuai had fought a fierce battle with Takahashi Shota on Mount Longhu. After his eyes were injured, there was a scar on them. At this time, his eyes looked always red, as if he was going to be furious at any time. He looked very frightening. After Zhang Huashuai rushed into the hall of the pavilion, he looked around first, then grabbed a teapot on the chopping board and took a sip. Zhang Tongtian quickly shouted, Hey, that's the tea for Taishang Laojun. Zhang Huashuai didn't hear him clearly. He wiped his mouth and looked at Zhang Tongtian with bulging eyes. Xixiang, what did you just say? Zhang Tongtian sighed and shook his head. Forget it. Put down the teapot. Tell me what's the matter. Zhang Huashuai put down the teapot and said with some excitement and mystery, Xixiang, do you know what I just heard? Zhang Tongtian said unhappily, I don't have the mind-reading ability, nor do I have the fate-reading ability or the leak-reading ability. How could I know these things? Zhang Huashuai slapped his thigh and said, Damn it, Li Wudi really deserves it. He didn't want to be the reincarnated Wisdom King, but he had to hang out with those seductive foxes. Now he's finally caused big trouble. He's in big trouble. Zhang Tongtian was a little surprised and asked, What happened? Modern society was an information society, and it was also a network society. Top masters like Li Jiandong didn't like to use modern communication tools on the internet, but that didn't mean that others didn't like it. It was impossible that no one in the cultivation world didn't know that the Japanese cultivation masters had come to China in a group. They had come in high spirits and returned in disappointment. Naturally, It was impossible that no one didn't know about it. In addition, after the Japanese cultivation world returned, they immediately sent messengers to contact the responsible leaders of the various sects in China from all directions, telling them about the current critical situation. They also hoped that the Chinese cultivation world would join forces with them to stop the reincarnated Wisdom King from acting on his own, forcing him to change his mind and put justice before family. Such a shocking event had just spread in a sect. In just a few minutes, almost the entire cultivation world knew about it. Only some cultivators who lived in seclusion were still at a loss. After hearing Zhang Huashui's words, Zhang Tongtian immediately showed a vigilant look and said, "Why are you so excited? Aren't you afraid that this is a trick of the Japanese? They want to use us to make us destroy ourselves?" Zhenren Li is a rare genius in our Chinese cultivation world in 100 years. He is also a great master who has made our Chinese cultivation world proud. You have to control yourself. Don't be used by the Japanese. Did you forget the pain when the wound on your eye healed? Zhang Huashui was so angry that he pointed at the wound on his eye and said in Sichuan dialect, "Zhangmen Shixiang, do you think Laozi is a scatterer? If these Japanese bastards dare to appear in front of me, I'll strangle them to death with my hands. If 2 of them come, I'll strangle them to death. However, Shixiang, you haven't forgotten that the Fox Zen School still owes us dozens of lives, have you? This is a blood feud." Zhang Huashui paced back and forth impatiently and angrily. He pointed to the door and said, "Li Yundong beat those Japanese sons of bitches in Mount Longhu. He is indeed." Zhang Huashui gave him a thumbs up and said with admiration, but soon he said with a face full of indignation, "But even if he is a hero, he can't mess around, right? He has to give us an explanation, right? Who can we find to avenge the dozens of lives of our Qingqing sect?" In the end, it still fell on Li Yundong. "Shixiang, don't tell me that you don't want to take revenge on Li Yundong just because he is a hero?" Zhang Tongtian listened silently. He let out a long sigh and said, "Now there is no evidence and the truth is unknown. It's not good to rashly put the blame on Li Yundong." Zhang Huashui was so anxious that he stamped his feet. "Shixiang, you're really muddle-headed. This must have been done by the people of the Fox Zen School. Li Yundong is the leader of the Fox Zen School. If we don't look for him, who else can we look for? At least, you should ask him to give us an explanation so that we can give an explanation to the families of those disciples who died." Zhang Tongtian turned to look at Zhang Huashui and said, "But now that the Japanese are involved, won't it be a little too much to kick them when they are down?" Zhang Huashui said angrily, "What do you mean by kicking them when they are down? It's clear that Li Yundong is greedy and lecherous. He has indeed done meritorious service to our Chinese cultivation world before, but this is a different matter. Can he not give us an explanation if he has done us a favor? Can he play around with the lives of the cultivators in the world and the fate of the Chinese cultivation world just because he has done us a favor?" Zhang Tongtian's face darkened. After thinking for a long time, he slowly stood up and asked, "What do the Zhengyi school and the Chuanjin dragon sect think?" Zhang Huashui stamped his feet and said, "They have already agreed to intervene. They are just waiting for our Qingqing sect. Shixiang, if you don't go, I will take my own people." Zhang Tongtian's face darkened and he shouted, "Nonsense! Who said I won't go?" Zhang Huashui was overjoyed. "Shixiang, do you agree to go?" Zhang Tongtian glared at him and said, "If I don't go, who will take care of you?" Although Zhang Huashui had been scolded, he was not angry. He touched his forehead and laughed. At this time, the Chinese cultivation world was surging in the dark, and the undercurrents were surging. In the distant Japanese cultivation world, an unprecedentedly huge wave was brewing. It wouldn't take long for these 2 torrents to converge and press down on Li Yundong like an avalanche. Chapter 926. Wakayama Prefecture, Japan. Mount Koya. Immovable Hall. When Li Yundong took away the real body of Wisdom King in Mount Koya, it caused a huge phenomenon. In this era of extremely developed information and everyone had a camera phone, such a phenomenon was immediately photographed by many locals and tourists, uploaded to the internet at the first time, and then quickly spread. The miracle of Wisdom King's manifestation instantly ignited the fanaticism of the Japanese people for Mount Koya. In the past few days, the number of believers of Zhenyan Tantrism had increased sharply, and there were even more Japanese Buddhists who came to Mount Koya to pay homage to the immovable Wisdom King. The monk in charge of selling tickets counted the money every day until his hands were cramping. Kaisai Hikaryuni didn't expect that they would lose the real body of Wisdom King, but they would gain great prestige and benefits. It could be said that they had lost the east corner and gained the mulberry elm. He was so happy that he couldn't close his mouth. But before he was happy for a long time, a shocking piece of bad news almost made him faint on the spot. Your Excellency, we can't hesitate any longer. Now the fate of the Japanese cultivation world is all in your hands. There were a lot of people kneeling on the tatami in the immovable hall. The one who spoke was the new great monk of the Tiantai sect. His name was Tamura Ichiko. Behind him were the cultivation leaders of various sects in Japan. Kaisai Hikaryuni closed his eyes and kept silent with a calm face. He also knew what had happened recently, but Zhenyan Tantrism was the sect that didn't want to get involved the most. It was not that they were not afraid of death, but that they didn't want to destroy the good situation in front of them. Mount Koya was extremely popular because of the Wisdom King's manifestation. Such a situation could be said to be rare in 100 years. It was an extremely rare opportunity, and it was also a great opportunity for the power of Zhenyan Tantrism to expand. But if they got involved at this time, it would be like slapping themselves in the face. Mount Koya was the Taoist field of the immovable Wisdom King, and they had obtained great benefits and fame because of the immovable Wisdom King. But now they had to deal with the reincarnated Wisdom King. What was going on? Was he slapping himself in the face? But if he didn't go, the consequences would be unimaginable. Kaisai Hikaryuni originally thought that he could get away with it by pretending to be stupid, but he didn't expect that the other cultivation sects would not let go of Zhenyan Tantrism. They immediately joined forces and went to Mount Koya Hikaryuni to petition. The word petition sounded nice, but in fact, it was to force Zhenyan Tantrism sect to take action. Otherwise, if they had a conflict with the reincarnated Wisdom Hikaryuni, they would definitely cause the other sects to suffer huge losses. If Zhenyan Tantrism did not participate, it was very likely that all the sects would suffer heavy losses. Only their sect would be intact, and there would be a situation where Zhenyan Tantrism would dominate the cultivation world in the future. The Chinese loved infighting, but the Japanese weren't any better. After thinking about it, these Japanese cultivation sects realized that they had all offended the reincarnated Wisdom King. Zhenyan Tantrism wanted to hide and be a good person. How could it be so easy? No, come with us. If you don't, we'll beat you into a horseback deer. Therefore, when so many cultivators from different sects came together, Kaisai Hikaryuni felt as if he was carrying Mount Tai on his shoulder and couldn't even straighten up his back. However, Kaisai Hikaryuni's cultivation quotient was quite high. He was in pain, but he didn't show any expression on his face. He thought to himself, if I go, the previous prosperity will be in vain. But if I don't go, I'm afraid that Mount Koya will be covered with blood today. Kaisai Hikaryuni closed his eyes and chanted Buddhist scriptures in a low voice with a solemn look. After thinking for a long time, he finally thought of the most critical point. The reincarnated Wisdom King is still far away from us, but now these people are in front of us. If I don't agree, there will be a bloody case immediately. Kaisai Hikaryuni knew that the current Japanese cultivation world could no longer be judged by common sense. In order to deal with Li Yunyang, a top expert, all the sects had gone all out. There was a kind of if I can't live, you can't live either attitude. Kaisai Hikaryuni thought for a long time in front of everyone, then opened his eyes slightly and said slowly, but the reincarnated Wisdom King is so powerful, and he has obtained the true body of Wisdom King. I'm afraid that we can't beat him even if we work together. Tamura Hikaryuni seemed to have expected him to say this. He immediately said, Your Excellency, we are indeed no match for Wisdom King, but there is one person in the world who can defeat Wisdom King. Kaisai Hikaryuni was moved and asked, Oh? Who is it? Is there such a person in the world? Tamura Hikaryuni said firmly, Buddha Tathagata. Kaisai Hikaryuni was stunned. He was tongue-tied and couldn't say anything for a long time. This sentence sounded very reasonable, but in fact, it was a little ridiculous. The immovable Wisdom King was the incarnation of the angry thoughts of Buddha, and his power came from Buddha. The relationship between the two was a bit similar to the relationship between a party and an army. Buddha could mobilize Wisdom King, but Wisdom King could not mobilize Buddha. This was the principle of the party directs the gun. The immovable Wisdom King was the best in the world when fighting. When he was really ruthless, No one was his opponent. But if there was really a role that could restrain the immovable Wisdom King, it would be Buddha Tathagata. But could Buddha Tathagata be seen casually? For thousands of years, countless monks had knocked on wooden fish all their lives and recited Buddhist scriptures that could fill the sea, but no one had ever seen Buddha Tathagata. Kaisai Hikaryuni couldn't believe his ears. These guys wanted to find Buddha Tathagata to deal with Wisdom King? How could they find him? Tamura Hikaryuni knew that Kaisai Hikaryuni had such a question. He said very seriously, "Your Excellency, have you forgotten the 10,000 Buddha worshipping formation?" Kaisai Hikaryuni's face changed and he said in surprise, "The 10,000 Buddha worshipping formation? That's impossible. We don't have enough manpower." The 10,000 Buddha worshipping formation was just a huge magic formation that existed in the Buddhist cultivation world in theory. The monk who created the magic formation and the age of the monk had been unknown for a long time. However, this magic formation was created by some Buddhist cultivators with a strong sense of suffering. It was a super large magic formation used to summon Buddha Tathagata. This magic formation used the spiritual power and junchi of many eminent monks as the medium, and the magic formation as the cauldron. It merged the power of many eminent monks into one, and created a force equivalent to the power of a golden immortal. It was used to break through the barrier between the human world and the heaven realm, so that their voices could be directly transmitted to Buddha Tathagata. But how could it be easy to break through the barrier between the human world and the heaven realm? Since this magic formation was created, no one had used it yet because the requirements of this magic formation were too harsh. Just the host of the core magic formation alone needed 20 Thunder Retribution Masters. 200 Jinshin Masters were needed to act as a link in the middle, and at least 15,000 Yang Spirit Masters were needed to act as a link. Such a huge number was enough to make any Buddhist cultivation sect give up on the formation and give up on it. Kaisai Hikaryuni knew that throughout the history of China and Japan, no matter which sect, it was absolutely impossible for so many masters to gather together in the same era. However, after hearing this, Tamura Ichikaryuni smiled and said, "Your Excellency, the masters of Shintoism are also willing to help. Moreover, we have also reached an agreement with the eminent monks of the Chinese cultivation world. They agree to join the 10,000 Buddha worshipping formation. We have almost gathered the number of people in this magic formation. As long as Zhenyan Tantrism agrees to join, it will be a matter of course." After hearing this, Kaisai Hikaryuni was extremely shocked. He knew that if the cultivation world of China and Japan were added together, it would indeed be possible to gather so many cultivation masters. However, he did not expect that the cultivation world of China and Japan would be able to join hands at this critical juncture. He did not expect that the Buddhist sects and the Shintoism sects, which had always been at odds with each other, could also join hands. This was really incredible. At this time, Kaisai Hikaryuni knew that he had no way out. If he continued to shirk and hesitate, he would be the public enemy and traitor of the Japanese cultivation world. He would lose his reputation in an instant, and even his body and soul might be destroyed. He didn't dare to hesitate. He immediately chanted the name of Buddha and said with emotion, "It turns out that you have done such a big thing quietly. I'm ashamed. I'm still in the dark." Tamura Ichikaryuni said with a smile, "Your Excellency, do you agree?" Kaisai Hikaryuni bent down and said to the many cultivators, "Everyone, let's go forward together." Hearing this, everyone was overjoyed and kowtowed in return. "You're too polite, great monk." At this point, the cultivation world of Japan had become unprecedentedly unified. A huge cultivation machine was working like never before. All the sects had abandoned their prejudices and disagreements. The originally scattered forces had gathered together and aimed at one goal. The last time the Japanese cultivation world had united was during the War of Aggression against China. However, at that time, they had to deal with an ancient and declining Chinese cultivation world. This time they were going to deal with a single individual, the reincarnated Wisdom King. In the distant Mount Tianlong of Dongwu City, Li Yundong's fingers were flying, pinching the Wisdom King Dharma Mudra and reciting the Sarangama Sutra. With a serious expression, he was suppressing demons and eliminating evil spirits for Su Chan. Zhou Qin looked at Li Yundong worriedly. She knew that Li Yundong had not eaten or drunk for 2 whole days. If this went on, she didn't know when it would end. Zhou Qin was looking at Li Yundong worriedly. Suddenly, she heard a fragrant wind coming from the side. She turned her head and saw Zi Yuan flying in from outside. After the flipping sky seal opened up the stone room, The originally turbid and airtight stone room also became bright and ventilated. There was a delicate fragrance coming from Zi Yuan's body. When she walked in from the stone cave with the wind outside, it was really like the fragrance of orchids, making people feel relaxed and happy. Zi Yuan glanced at Xueqi and asked in a low voice, "Is he still like this?" Xueqi nodded worriedly and said softly, "Zi Yuan, do you think Su Chan will get better?" Zi Yuan sighed and said, "I don't know. I hope Li Yundong can succeed. But what I'm most worried about now is that the cultivators of other sects will come to stop him after they get the news." Xueqi snorted coldly. "Them? What right do they have to meddle in our business?" Zi Yuan shook her head and said in a low voice, "The tallest tree in the forest will be destroyed by the wind. Li Yundong's cultivation is close to the peak. What I'm afraid of is not the cultivators of the mortal world, but—" As she said this, she quietly pointed to the sky. Xueqi's eyes suddenly widened. Just as she was about to continue speaking, a figure suddenly rushed in like a gust of wind. It was Ruan Hongling. Ruan Hongling's pretty face was pale, and she said breathlessly, "Shiji Zi Yuan, there are a lot of people at the foot of the mountain." As soon as she finished speaking, Lin Miao also walked in quickly. She looked shocked and said to Xueqi, "Eldest Shiji, go out and have a look." Xueqi and Zi Yuan looked at each other and nodded together. They said in a low voice, "Let's go out and have a look." The human immortals and fairy immortals of the three immortals walked out of the stone cave together. They stood on the mountainside of Mount Tianlong and looked down. What they saw was incredible. The two knowledgeable masters of thunder retribution were so scared that they sucked in a breath of cold air and turned pale. Chapter 927. It was early in the morning. The sun had just risen, and the sky was full of rosy clouds. It was the golden time for cultivation. At this time, most cultivators were meditating in their own cultivation rooms. Very few people would choose to go out at such a golden time. But at present, Mount Tianlong was densely packed with people. Some of them were standing on trees, their bodies swaying gently with the branches swaying in the wind. Some were standing in the jungle, their figures half hidden. Most of them were standing in the Taoist field at the foot of Mount Tianlong. Xueqi and Zi Yuan looked over and saw a dense crowd of people in the Taoist hall. Apart from people, there were only more people. Even when the 6 great sects had besieged the Fox Zen sect, there had not been so many people. Xueqi had returned from the Shang dynasty and could be considered a person who had seen a lot of big scenes. However, when she saw so many people gathered together, she was shocked. She couldn't help but exclaim, "How can there be so many people? I'm afraid there are tens of thousands of people here, right?" Zi Yuan looked at the foot of the mountain in shock and said in a low voice, "There should be. Why are there so many cultivators gathered together? Tens of thousands of cultivators gathered together." Such a thing was extremely rare in the history of the cultivation world of China and Japan. When tens of thousands of ordinary people gathered together, it would be a huge scene, not to mention that these tens of thousands of ordinary people were all ordinary people. Although the country monitored cultivators closely, the lowest cultivation quotient here was a top Yang spirit master. If they wanted to kill a person, they might not be able to succeed 100% of the time. However, if they really wanted to go to a place, nothing could stop them. Xueqi's face darkened as she looked at the terrifying scene in front of her. An extremely ominous thought came to her mind. Could it be that they are all here to deal with Master? Zi Yuan hurriedly turned around and wanted to quickly walk into the stone room to warn Li Yundong. What she was most worried about had finally happened. Li Yundong's strength had reached an astonishing level. If he hadn't been so ostentatious, he would have been a legendary figure like Zhang Daoling, Wang Chongyang, and Zhang Sanfeng in the history of Chinese cultivation in the future, and his name would have been recorded in history. But he had fallen into the worst deadlock. Ever since Zi Yuan rescued Su Chan, who had fainted and revealed her true body in the Shangyuan Hotel in Tiannan City, she had been deeply worried. Xueqi didn't know the deeds of the mystical silver fox, but she, Zi Yuan, was the future leader of the Linggong sect. She knew all these secrets. Since ancient times, the only one who could cultivate all 9 foxtails into golden foxtails was the mystical silver fox with mystical luck. Su Chan's 2 foxtails had turned golden. This was definitely not a coincidence. But Zi Yuan knew this in her heart, but she didn't know how to tell him. She knew that even if she said it, he wouldn't change his love for Su Chan. And how could Li Yundong not know this? He definitely knew. He just didn't want to say it out loud. Zi Yuan's eyebrows were full of worry and fear. She rushed out a few steps, but soon stopped. Zhou Qin, who had followed her into the stone room, asked, "What's wrong?" Zi Yuan turned her face, sighed, and said softly, "Li Yundong is doing a ritual for Su Chan now. How can he have time to come out? Forget it, let's not disturb him. Here, let us deal with it." Zhou Qin was shocked. She thought to herself, "There are tens of thousands of cultivators here. Can the two of us deal with them?" But she saw that after Zi Yuan took a deep breath, the worry on her face gradually disappeared, replaced by calmness and indifference. She still looked like a calm fairy. Zhou Qin secretly admired Zi Yuan's willpower and cultivation. She thought to herself, "Haven't I been by Li Yundong's side all this time just for this moment? Why did you shrink back at such a critical moment?" Zhou Qin made up her mind. She gritted her teeth and took a deep breath. The air in the early morning was icy cold. After taking a deep breath, Zhou Qin's whole body suddenly felt cold. She calmed down, and there was a trace of determination in her eyes. She nodded and said, "Well, I'll take the lead. Zi Yuan, you help me." As soon as she finished speaking, she heard a voice behind them. "Nonsense! Can the two of you fight against so many people? I'm afraid I can't do it either." Zhou Qin's body shook slightly. She looked back and saw that Li Yundong was looking at the two of them with his hands behind his back. Zhou Qin couldn't help but ask Master Yub. Zi Yuan also saw Li Yundong and asked doubtfully, "Yub, is your young spirit out of your body?" Li Yundong looked at Zi Yuan and nodded gently. He sighed and said, "Yes, if I don't come out, you two will do stupid things." Li Yundong slowly walked over to the two of them and said, "Zhou Qin, you're not thinking of doing something stupid like risking your life to buy time for me, are you?" Zhou Qin's childish thoughts were immediately seen through by Li Yundong. Her face turned red in an instant, and her ears were so red that they seemed to be dripping blood. She subconsciously turned her face away, but soon turned back and looked at Li Yundong stubbornly. "If necessary, yes." Li Yundong sighed. He stretched out his hand and patted Zhou Qin's shoulder gently. With a complicated look in his eyes, he said, "Zhou Qin, but have you ever thought about what I would do if something happened to you?" Zhou Qin was stunned when she heard this. Her extremely beautiful eyes couldn't help but become misty. She slowly lowered her head and said in a low voice, "Master, do you really have me in your heart?" Li Yundong sighed and asked, "Do I not have you in my heart?" When Zhou Qin heard this, she was stunned. She carefully pondered over the meaning of Li Yundong's words, and her mind was in a mess. What does Master mean by this? What does he mean by having me in his heart? It sounds a little ambiguous, but why can't I hear any other meaning when Master says it? Zhou Qin was so concerned that she let her imagination run wild for a moment. At this moment, she was a little dazed. Li Yundong looked at Zi Yuan and saw that she was also looking at him worriedly. When their eyes met, they seemed to understand each other's thoughts. Li Yundong nodded and said, "Don't worry, my real body is still casting spells to suppress the mystical silver fox in Su Chan's body." Zi Yuan was slightly relieved. She asked, "What do you think we should do now?" Li Yundong glanced around and saw that there were people everywhere at the foot of the mountain. He sighed softly and said with great emotion, "Why don't you two persuade me not to go against the cultivators of the world?" Zi Yuan laughed. She pulled the hair by her ear and said softly, "Is it useful?" Li Yundong glanced at her and also laughed. He said, "We cultivators always say that we should be one with heaven and man, and we should use our own small universe to accommodate the universe of heaven and earth. But the world is so big that it can accommodate everything, but in fact, it is difficult for the world to accommodate some aliens." Li Yundong said with confidence and composure, "Each of us cultivators actually lives in our own spirit space. Everyone cultivates for different reasons, and everyone cultivates for different purposes. At this time, they united together and appeared in front of me. Some of them did it for their own interests, some for the interests of other sects, some were coerced to come together, and some came to take advantage of the situation." Li Yundong laughed, but there was no anger in his smile. It was as if he had seen through all kinds of life in the world in an instant, and he had seen through the hearts and true thoughts of these people. Li Yundong sighed softly and continued, "Each of them has their own purposes, but they have never thought about why I refuse to agree to their requests. Zi Yuan listened and was silent for a while, then said in a low voice, "Everyone's position is different, so of course the price is different." Li Yundong looked back at the stone room and saw that there was a burst of golden light coming from it. Around Su Chan, golden Sanskrit characters were lingering around her. Li Yundong's real body was still quickly pinching the Mahamudra and reciting the scriptures. Li Yundong smiled deeply and lovingly. He slowly shook his head, walked out of the stone cave, and appeared halfway up the mountain. As soon as he appeared, the gazes of everyone at the foot of the mountain all turned to look at him. The gazes of tens of thousands of cultivators were really pointing at him, and the pressure was unimaginable. If it had been an ordinary person, he would have collapsed and become a cripple at this moment. However, Li Yundong just took it as a breeze. He smiled slightly and said slowly, "It's so lively, really lively." Li Yundong's gaze swept across the crowd and fell on Du Fei of the Chuanjin Dragon sect. He couldn't help but be stunned and said, "Zhenren Du, you're here too?" Du Fei smiled bitterly. He sighed, saluted, and said, "Zhenren Li, we meet again." Li Yundong smiled and glanced at the others around Du Fei. He saw that his old acquaintances, Wei Qing and Yu Sheng, were both next to him. When their eyes met his, they immediately lowered their heads and looked ashamed. It was obvious that they had been coerced to come here. In such a situation, they had no choice but to come. Otherwise, they would be blamed and reviled by thousands of people. Li Yundong nodded slightly and didn't make things difficult for them. His gaze quickly swept across the crowd. When he saw the other people of the Zhengyi school, he didn't think too much about it. However, when he saw Wan Zhenyuan, he was stunned for a moment. The corners of his mouth curled up, and an incomparably sarcastic smile appeared. "Master Wan, it's true that I can see you everywhere." Wan Zhenyuan didn't seem to understand Li Yunyang's sarcasm. He smiled slightly, walked out of the crowd, and said in a clear voice, "Zhenren Li, you are a great master and genius that has not been seen in the Chinese cultivation world for nearly 100 years. You originally had the hope of becoming a great master and leaving your name in history, but you wholeheartedly protected a fox demon. You went against the heaven and aroused public anger. I really feel sorry for you, Zhenren Li." Hearing this, Li Yundong couldn't help but raise his head and laugh. "Those who know me say that I'm worried, and those who don't know me say that I don't want anything. Zhenren Wan, according to what you said, I should thank you, right?" Wan Zhenyuan saluted and said, "I don't dare. I hope that Zhenren Li can stop before it's too late." At this time, Ise Shengguang of the Japanese cultivation world also came forward. He said loudly, "Wisdom King, we don't want to be enemies with you, but we are more afraid that the nightmare of the mystical silver fox will come again. I hope you can change your mind and kill the demons for the right way." Li Yundong glanced at him and asked calmly, "Shengguang, do you know who the person you want me to kill is?" Ise Shengguang was stunned for a moment. He knew that Su Chan was Li Yundong's lover, but he didn't know the details of Li Yundong and Su Chan's meeting and falling in love. Moreover, Japan was a society where men were superior to women. Women had a low social status and were often just accessories of men. Only a small number of strong women like Masako Tachibana and Ise Chuyun could get rid of such a low social status. But even so, in the thinking of these Japanese, cultivators should have a strong sense of self-sacrifice and dedication. When necessary, they could sacrifice themselves, let alone the women around them. Although Ise Shengguang was a wise man in the Japanese cultivation world, he also had his own thinking limitations. He immediately said anxiously, "Wisdom King, I know that there is a saying in your country that a man will never worry about not having a wife. There is also a saying that there are plenty of fish in the sea. Zhenren Li, why do you have to go against all the cultivators in the world for a fox demon?" Li Yundong's smile was even more sarcastic. He said slowly, "A man will never worry about not having a wife? There are plenty of fish in the sea." "Well said, but do you know that if it weren't for this fox demon that you disdain, I would still be an otaku that everyone looks down on, a loser who doesn't care about anyone? I'm afraid that the great genius and master in your eyes, who is rarely seen in 100 years, is still at home and has achieved nothing. When I was at my lowest, the fox demon that all of you said should be cut 1,000 times accompanied me when we were chased out of the place we lived. The two of us were homeless on the streets, but she followed me from beginning to end. She never left me, and she firmly believed that I would achieve great things in the future. When I was at my weakest, the fox demon you speak of, who should have been abandoned, taught me the art of cultivation. She made me understand that there was another mysterious world of cultivation in this world, and that there were such miraculous things. She gave me a goal in life, and gave me the motivation to forge ahead on the path of cultivation, Li Yundong said slowly. His voice was not very loud, but it clearly reached everyone's ears. There were hundreds of sects and tens of thousands of cultivators in the cultivation world of China. No one made a sound. It was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. Only Li Yundong's voice echoed in the mountains. When I was at my lowest point, she was by my side to help me and support me. When I was at my lowest point, she still wanted to help me save money, fearing that I would be poor and hungry. Li Yundong glanced at the crowd and said slowly, "Now that I've achieved success and become a rare genius and master, do I have to go back and kill the girl who never left me? You're saying that I'm a genius and a great master?" Li Yundong's eyes swept across the crowd and he said slowly, "Now that I've achieved success and become a great master, do I have to go back and kill this girl who never left me?" Li Yundong's eyes slowly swept across the faces of the cultivators of the various sections. He said, "Tell me, if I do this, am I still a human?" Everyone listened to Li Yundong's words. Although his tone was flat and his words were simple, they could all hear the infinite deep feelings in his tone. They were all silent, and no one answered Li Yundong's words. Li Yundong looked at all the people present, smiled, and said, "Not to mention that there are only 10,000 of you here today. Even if all the cultivators in the world come, even if all the gods and Buddhas of the Purple Cloud Palace come together, if they want to touch my girl, they will have to step over me first." Everyone's hearts trembled. Isi Shengguang raised his head and looked at Li Yundong in despair. He said loudly, "Wisdom King, is there really no way to save it?" Li Yundong didn't look at him anymore. He raised his head and said slowly, "No matter what you say today, I only have one thing to say." Li Yundong's eyes instantly became extremely sharp. His voice was as sonorous as iron, and he said resolutely, "If you have any means, bring it on. Well, it seems that it has been a while since I wrote a big chapter of about 450 words. Chapter 928. Li Yundong's words made the hearts of the cultivators on and off the mountain feel cold. They knew that a battle was inevitable. Li Yundong's reputation had risen over the past year. After several tough battles in a row, he had become famous all over the world. No one in the cultivation world didn't know him. Who would dare to challenge him? Li Yundong glanced at the crowd. Seeing that no one was talking, he said, "Don't you want to stop me? Who will go first? Or, all of you together?" Li Yundong's voice shook the top of the mountain. Everyone was silent, and no one dared to take the initiative. What a joke! Who would dare to fight with the reincarnated Wisdom King? Were they tired of living? Fighting was different from other things. If there was a slight mistake, all the cultivation they had worked hard for over the years would be in vain. These people all knew that no matter how powerful Li Yundong was, it was impossible for him to defeat these tens of thousands of cultivation masters. However, it was absolutely impossible for these tens of thousands of cultivation masters to retreat unscathed. Therefore, no one was willing to be the cannon fodder in front of them. For a moment, there was complete silence on the mountain. Li Yundong couldn't help sneering and saying, "Since you don't want to come up and teach me, why don't you just leave together?" But no one was willing to leave. Li Yundong saw that everyone was whispering to each other. They were all afraid of fighting, but they refused to leave. He couldn't help but say angrily, "You don't want to fight, and you don't want to leave. What do you want?" Li Yundong shouted, and there was a loud crack in the air. It was as if a bolt of thunder had pierced through everyone's ears, shaking their minds. At this time, Zhang Huashui of the Qingqing sect couldn't help but say to Zhang Tongtian, "Xixiang, if you don't dare to go, I'll go." Zhang Tongtian quickly grabbed his hot-tempered Xixiang. He knew Zhang Huashui's temper. If he went up to challenge Li Yundong, he was afraid that he would fight with Li Yundong with his life. Judging from Li Yundong's situation, most of the people who fought with him did not have a good result. They were either dead or injured. Many people thought that the higher one's cultivation base was, the more they would be able to control themselves, but in reality, it was the opposite. The higher the cultivation of a person, the more dangerous and unpredictable it was. Because both sides had the possibility of defeating the other, they did not dare to be careless, let alone hold back. Although Zhang Huashui's cultivation was far lower than Li Yundong's, If he found a flaw and attacked Li Yundong's vital part, even a golden immortal would be defeated. Zhang Tongtian would never expect Li Yunyang to show mercy, so he immediately grabbed Zhang Huashui, glared at him, and shouted, "Are you the leader or am I? Want to be in the limelight? We'll talk about it when you're in my position." Zhang Huashui's face immediately turned purple when he was scolded. However, when he saw Zhang Tongtian walk out, he suddenly realized that this was his senior brother's love for him. He was afraid that he would be impulsive and go out to ruin things. Zhang Tongtian walked out of the crowd. He stopped and flew up in an instant, not far from Li Yundong. He bowed and said, "I'm Zhang Tongtian, the leader of the Qingqing sect." "Nice to meet you, Zhenren Li." Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, "So it's you, Zhenren Zhang. How do you want to fight with me?" Zhang Tongtian shook his head and said, "Zhenren Li, I'm ashamed of my inferiority." Li Yundong said, "Oh? Zhenren Zhang, do you also want to persuade me to put righteousness before family? If so, I don't think you should waste your breath." Zhang Tongtian shook his head again and said, "No, I just want to ask Zhenren Li one thing. After I ask, our Qingqing sect will turn around and leave." Li Yundong asked curiously, "What is it?" Zhang Tongtian's eyes suddenly shot out two rays of lightning, and he stared straight at Li Yundong. He said slowly, "Zhenren Li, a few months ago, there was a murder on Mount Qingqing of our Qingqing sect. Dozens of disciples who were guarding the night in our sect were murdered. When I arrived at the scene that night, I found that there was already a river of blood on the spot, and the corpses had even been piled up like a tower. But what was even more unfortunate was that we sensed the fox demon's qi at the scene. Therefore, I would like to ask Zhenren Li, what is the relationship between your Fox Zen school and this murder?" Li Yundong was shocked. He hadn't expected that Zhang Tongtian would bring up this matter at this time. He said in a deep voice, "Zhenren Zhang, if I'm not wrong, it should have been done by Lu Yi, the former leader of the Fox Zen school. His purpose was to frame me." Zhang Tongtian's eyes narrowed, and then he asked, "Now that Lu Yi is dead, Zhenren Li, aren't you saying that there's no evidence?" Li Yundong said coldly, "Then what do you want to do, Zhenren Zhang?" Zhang Tongtian sighed softly. With a flick of his wrist, a three-colored divine light suddenly flashed behind him, and a 3-foot-long sword appeared in his hand. The Sanhuang sword? The cultivators at the foot of the mountain were all stirred when they saw it. Even most of the cultivators in the Japanese cultivation world knew this peerless, powerful magical weapon, which was ranked second among the 5 great divine swords of the Chinese Taoist cultivation world. Many of them had already seen the power of the immortal trapping sword of the 4 immortal killing swords. Just the immortal trapping sword of the 4 immortal killing swords had trapped the mystical silver fox. How powerful would the Sanhuang sword be? Although the Sanhuang sword had been taken from Zhang Xueqi's hands by Xinxiu, the power of the powerful magical weapon depended on the user. Zhang Xueqi's own cultivation was among the best of the younger generation, but compared with the top masters, he was far behind. Therefore, although this powerful magical weapon was powerful, the power and role it could play in his hands were extremely limited. However, if Zhang Tongtian was the one wielding this magic treasure, then it would be a completely different story. The Qingqing sect was a big sect in the middle of Sichuan, and it was one of the few big sects in the Taoist cultivation world. It had a deep foundation. Zhang Tongtian himself was also one of the famous masters of thunder retribution. He had been famous for a long time. He and the Sanhuang sword had already become one. If he used it, the power of the divine sword would definitely be earth-shattering. He might have the power to fight against Li Yundong. The cultivators of all sects had temporarily gathered together. Although they were putting pressure on Li Yundong, there were also many people who had come to join in the fun. If they could see such a top-level battle with their own eyes, it would even be better than 10 years of hard work in seclusion. Li Yundong saw the Sanhuang sword in Zhang Tongtian's hand. He smiled slightly and said, "Zhenren Zhang wants to fight with me with powerful magical weapons? My powerful magical weapon is not with me. Why don't I fight with your powerful magical weapon with my bare hands? What do you think?" When the crowd heard this, there was an uproar. They all knew that Li Yundong had already obtained the Dharmakaya of Wisdom King, but they didn't know how powerful he would be after obtaining it. Seeing that he was going to fight with Zhang Tongtian, who was holding the Sanhuang sword, with his bare hands, they were all shocked. It was like a duel between two sides. One side was empty-handed, while the other side was carrying a machine gun. How could they fight? Xueqi was also shocked when she heard this. She had already cultivated to the Thunder Retribution realm, and she was also a great master of the unity of heaven and man realm. Naturally, she could feel that the Sanhuang sword in Zhang Tongtian's hand was different. In Zhang Xueqi's hand, the Sanhuang sword was just a sharp and powerful magical weapon. Anyone who touched it would break it. It could be called a magic weapon, but it might not have any magic power. But right now, in Zhang Tongtian's hand, the Sanhuang sword was flowing with a faint three-colored divine light. This divine light spread out in all directions. Two of them went straight into the ground, and the other went straight to the sky. It seemed to be continuously absorbing the three completely different powers of heaven, earth, and water. Xueqi knew that if any powerful magical weapon could continuously absorb power from heaven, earth, and water, it was equivalent to having an endless source of power. It could be said to be endless and have endless divine power. Seeing that Li Yundong wanted to compete with Zhang Tongtian, who had the Sanhuang sword, with his bare hands, she couldn't help but feel anxious. Just as she was about to step forward to speak, she was pulled back by Ziyuan. Xueqi turned her head and said anxiously, "Ziyuan, let go of him. Master is too careless." The Sanhuang sword is a magical sword that is as famous as the Xuenyuan sword and the four fairy-killing swords. How can he fight the enemy empty-handed? However, Ziyuan shook her head. She gently pointed to the real body of Li Yundong, who was quickly forming Mahamudra and chanting Buddhist scriptures in the stone cave. She said, "No, Xueqi, Li Yundong doesn't really want to fight with them. This is just an open wades." Xueqi's eyes lit up and she blurted out, secretly crossing Chen Song. Ziyuan nodded slightly and sighed softly. "I hope Li Yundong can hold on until Su Chan wakes up." Xueqi said worriedly, "I hope so." The two of them looked at Li Yundong again. At this time, at the foot of the mountain, a monk came to the side of Master Purin, the abbot of Shiyuan Temple. He bowed his head and said in a low voice, "Abbot, the monks of the Pure Land True sect, the Tiantai sect, and the Xinyan Tantrism are all in place. Should we?" The relationship between the Buddhist cultivation world of China and Japan was special. The Japanese Buddhist community had always believed that China was the mother country of Japanese Buddhism. Therefore, although the relationship between the two countries had ups and downs and was extremely sensitive, the relationship between the Buddhist communities of the two countries was quite close. The monks of the two countries were rarely hostile to each other. Therefore, when the monk mentioned the various sects of the Japanese cultivation world, his tone was quite friendly. Purin raised his head and looked at Li Yundong in the distance. He sighed and turned to look at the abbot of Jinshan Temple, only to see that the abbot of Jinshan Temple also nodded at him. Purin sighed and said, "Sure enough, this happened." When Li Yundong wanted to learn the demon-subduing formation and wanted to borrow the burning thumb pot, I was worried that something like this would happen, so I repeatedly asked him what he should do if he encountered such a thing. But I didn't expect. Purin sighed and shook his head. The gratitude and grudges of the world are all illusory. Zhenren Li is possessed. Purin sighed with emotion. He turned his head and said to the monk, "Go and tell the monks that we are ready." The monk nodded and ran away quickly. After a while, a golden beam of light rose into the sky from the place where the Japanese Buddhist cultivation sects were gathered. A low chanting of Buddhist scriptures resounded in all directions, shaking the sky. Then the eminent monks of Jinshan Temple, Shiyuan Temple, Mount Putua, Mount Wui, and other famous temples also sat down cross-legged, pinched their fingers, and chanted Buddhist scriptures. After a while, another beam of light rose into the sky, echoing with the previous beam of light. It rushed straight into the sky, as if it wanted to poke a hole in the sky. Li Yundong was shocked by the scene in front of him, but he immediately recognized that this was the 10,000 Buddhas worshipping formation specially created by Buddhist cultivators to prevent Buddhism from being destroyed by demons in the Dharma ending age. If it was in the Dharma ending era, when demons and evil paths were rampant and the Buddhist Dharma was no match for evil arts, the Buddhist cultivators could use this array to directly connect to the heaven realm and invite Buddha to descend to the mortal world to subdue the demons and devils. However, the requirements of this magic formation were too harsh, so even if Buddhism had suffered several disasters, it had not had the chance to be used. But Li Yundong hadn't expected that he would see the 10,000 Buddhas worshipping formation, which had never been successfully used, appear in front of him. Li Yundong was shocked and angry. He laughed angrily and said, "Well, it seems that you think of me as a devil. His body moved and he wanted to rush towards the Dharma formation. However, as soon as Li Yundong moved his mind, he saw a three-colored divine light pouncing toward him like a bolt of lightning without warning. Li Yundong's figure flashed and he immediately retreated. Li Yundong retreated at an extremely fast speed, leaving an afterimage in the air. The three-colored divine light instantly tore Li Yundong's afterimage into countless pieces. Li Yundong took a closer look and saw that Zhang Tongtian was holding the Sanhuang sword and staring at him. He said slowly, "Zhenren Li, you can't have forgotten that your opponent is me, right?" Li Yundong's heart sank. He quickly glanced at the 10,000 Buddhas worshipping formation under his feet, and then looked at Zhang Tongtian. He knew that he wanted to stall for time, but the other party was also stalling for time. But he didn't know who would be the one to die in the end. Chapter 929. In Dongwu City, there was still a group of people rushing to Mount Tianlong. Yi. Calm. Hurry up, you good-for-nothings. Hurry up. Ding Nan ran quickly on the mountain road leading to Mount Tianlong. She walked as if she was flying, and her speed was amazing. She was like a strong and vigorous horse. Because of the battle in Nazuno, Ding Nan had violated the taboo of Chinese cultivators. Her Hell Wuzhong enchantment had become one of the most feared powerful magical weapons of Chinese cultivators. No one was willing to get close to her, so no one had taken the initiative to tell her about the big event of Mount Tianlong. The Japanese cultivation world had seen with their own eyes that she and Li Yundong had a close relationship after the battle. The two of them had talked very secretly, so they were afraid that she would turn to Li Yundong at the last moment. Therefore, almost all the sects in the Chinese cultivation world and the Japanese cultivators had visited them, except for the Yin-Yang sect of Mount Wuhua, which was led by Ding Nan. But after all, there was no such thing as an impenetrable wall in the world. It was simply too difficult to hide something in the modern information society. Although Ding Nan was obsessed with the way of cultivation and could be said to be even crazier than Zhou Qin, she wished that she could break 24 hours into 48 hours every day. She spent all her time on the way of cultivation. Although she almost didn't care about the things around her, her disciples had sharp ears and eyes, so they eventually found out about it. Although she had learned the news a little late, Ding Nan had at least learned about it. Shocked and angry, this rising star of the Chinese cultivation world immediately set off for Mount Tianlong. At the beginning of the journey, Ding Nan was still putting on the airs of the leader and sitting on her exaggerated high chair. But after walking for a while, Ding Nan found that something was wrong. With their speed, it would take them 2 days to reach Dongwu City. By the time they reached the foot of Mount Tianlong, the mountain would have been empty. Ding Nan was also worried about Li Yundong's safety. She gritted her teeth, stamped her feet, and headed for Mount Tianlong. Although it was the time of the most abundant rain, there was no cloud in Dongwu City today. The sky was so clear that ordinary people seemed to be able to see through the sky and into space. At this time, Ding Nan did not dare to fly into the air rashly. Otherwise, it would not be a good thing if she was shot down. Therefore, she sprinted all the way, her legs constantly stepping on the ground like a motor. Her cultivation was already at the golden body level. Not only did her speed not decrease along the way, but it also increased her speed. You almost there, the disciples of the Yin-Yang faction in Mount Wuhua were all people whose inner cores and true qi were not condensed. Although running looked simple, it was a test of whether one's breath was long and condensed. Along the way, almost all the disciples of the Yin-Yang faction fell behind, including Song Guohua. Only Zhao Jing, who had a South American style and had her body transformed by the Diyuan Jindan, was struggling to support Ding Nan. The brown-haired beauty ran so fast that she couldn't see clearly, but she still couldn't keep up with Ding Nan. If she took a break at this time, she would definitely be able to escape from Ding Nan. Ding Nan was busy going to Mount Tianlong, so she definitely did not have the energy or time to catch her. However, Zhao Jing had been with Ding Nan for a long time these days, and she had gradually been attracted by the mysterious cultivation techniques. Although Ding Nan was usually harsh to people, she was not as cold and ruthless as Zhang Yuan. At least, she was still a little human. Therefore, Zhao Jing's fear at the beginning had slowly turned into curiosity and yearning. Now, she was deeply immersed in it and could no longer extricate herself. Zhao Jing ran behind Ding Nan for a while. Just as she was about to run out of steam, she suddenly found that Ding Nan had suddenly stopped in front of her. Zhao Jing was stunned and stopped as well. She opened her mouth and asked in a rather awkward Chinese language, Master, what's wrong? The longer Zhao Jing had been in China these days, the more she had learned the Chinese language. At least she could barely communicate with others. As soon as she asked this question, Dingnan raised her hand to signal her not to speak. Although Dongwu City's economic development had been extremely rapid after the reform and opening up, and it was one of the second-tier cities in the country, Mount Tianlong was located in a remote suburb surrounded by barren mountains. Therefore, if Ding Nan and Zhao Jing were killed by a sneak attack, no one would be able to find them even after hundreds of years. Ding Nan looked around vigilantly. Her eyes swept around like lightning, and she suddenly said in a loud voice, "Which Taoist friend is here? Why don't you show yourself?" Zhao Jing also widened her eyes and looked around. She saw that although it was not deep in the mountains and forests, there were lush trees and strange rocks everywhere. It was really an extremely remote wilderness. Not to mention people, not even a ghost could be seen. They were almost there. Zhao Jing couldn't help but ask, "Master, there's not even a bird here. How can there be people?" Ding Nan sneered and said, "You're right. How can there be no birds in this wilderness? So, don't hide anymore. Don't try to fool me with such a low-grade illusory formation." As soon as Ding Nan's voice fell, 3 figures suddenly appeared around them. The 2 in front were dressed in kimonos, and the one in front was Abe Naomi, the young master of the Abe family. He was considered one of the top masters among the younger generation of the Japanese cultivation world, and he was proficient in all kinds of yin-yang illusions. Therefore, he had been transferred to guard around Mount Tianlong, using the illusion formation to block mortals from entering this place, and to prevent anything about Mount Tianlong from getting out. Abe Naomi had seen Ding Nan before. He was quite vigilant and spoke in Japanese. Tachibana Wakako was next to him. She translated his words to Ding Nan. "What are you doing here? Now Mount Tianlong has been sealed, and you can't go in and out at will." Hearing this, Ding Nan was furious and shouted, "Bullsh*T, this is China, not Japan. If I want to come here, do I need to ask you Japanese for your opinion?" Abe Naomi and Tachibana Wakako were stunned when they heard this. They turned to look at the person next to them, who was dressed in a Taoist robe. He was a young disciple of the Xueqi school. The disciple said to Ding Nan, "Leader Ding, now Mount Tianlong has been sealed by the cultivation world of China and Japan. You can't go up there." Ding Nan was furious. She took a step forward and said sternly, "Why can your sects go up the mountain, but the yin-yang sect of Mount Wuhua can't?" At this time, Zhao Jing also chimed in, "That's right, you don't have the right to do this." The disciple of the Xueqi school looked embarrassed. He wanted to speak again, but Ding Nan had already stepped forward. He quickly stood in front of her and said, "Leader Ding Yum." Ding Nan didn't wait for him to finish. She raised her arm, picked him up like a little spirit, and threw him out. Abe Naomi and Tachibana Wakako were shocked. Just as they were about to step forward, Ding Nan turned her head and glared at them. "If you're not afraid of death, try to stop me." Ding Nan's cultivation was getting higher and higher. Moreover, she had experienced several battles, so her bearing and spirit had slowly been honed. She now had the demeanor of a great cultivator. Her words were really amazing, making Abe Naomi and Tachibana Wakako feel like they were being robbed. For a moment, neither of them dared to step forward to stop her. Ding Nan snorted angrily, turned around, and stretched out her hands. Suddenly, ripples appeared where her fingers had pierced. She shouted and pulled hard to both sides, tearing a gap in front of her. As soon as the gap was torn open, there was a burst of dazzling divine light coming from inside, followed by a burst of deafening roars and chanting of Buddhist scriptures. Zhao Jing looked inside and saw 9 golden pillars of light rising from several directions at the foot of Mount Tianlong. There were 9 colored clouds rolling in the sky, and colorful ripples spread in all directions. However, when they spread in front of them, they were blocked by the magic formation and scattered into colorful dust, like falling cherry blossoms, dazzling people. Abe Naomi, Tachibana Wakako, and the others had been sent to guard the periphery, so they had some thoughts in their hearts. After all, who didn't want to see the strongest battle in the cultivation world? When the 2 of them saw that Ding Nan had forcibly broken the magic formation, they couldn't help but look inside. It would have been better if they hadn't seen it, but as soon as they saw it, they couldn't take their eyes off it. They saw an immovable wisdom king with 3 heads and 6 arms sitting on the mountainside of Mount Tianlong. It was the incarnation of Li Yundong's yang spirit. The 6 arms of this wisdom king were constantly pinching the mantra Mahamudra. In front of him was a middle-aged Taoist in a Taoist robe. This Taoist was holding a sword surrounded by green, yellow, and black. The 3 divine lights on this sword were constantly absorbing power from the heaven, earth, and water. As soon as he lifted it, the sky and earth shook, and the wind and clouds surged. The momentum was so great that it seemed that the sky was about to collapse and the earth was about to crack. The Taoist waved his hand, and the Sanhuang sword fell toward Li Yundong. The divine sword cut through the sky, leaving a long 3-colored shadow, as if it had cut the sky into 2 pieces. Ding Nan was shocked when she saw it. She had seen the Sanhuang sword before. At the Taoist assembly, the Sanhuang sword had been taken away by Xinxiu, which made her look down on this legendary divine sword. But now, in the hands of this middle-aged Taoist, this divine sword was terrifyingly powerful. With a raise of his hand, it really had the power to change the world. Ding Nan did not dare to imagine how she would defend herself if the Taoist priest slashed at her with his sword. In fact, whether it was a Taoist or Buddhist cultivation magic weapon, the more powerful the magic weapon was, the more ingenious it was. The magical effect of Ding Nan's Hell 5 Zhong Soul Hook was extremely simple. She just had to call out the other party's name, and then the ghosts of the Hell 5 Zhong Soul Hook would come out and pull the other party's soul into it. Then there would be no more tricks, not even the slightest bit of tricks. The Sanhuang sword was also raised and then slashed. It was a simple and ordinary action, but its power was so great that people didn't dare to look directly at it. The Qingqing sect had been established for thousands of years, and it was still standing today because of the Sanhuang sword, the most powerful magic weapon of the sect. The Shenyuan sword had long been lost, and the 4 fairy-killing swords had completely disappeared. Therefore, in fact, the most powerful ancient sword in the cultivation world was the Sanhuang sword. At this time, Abe Naomi and Tachibana Wakako also couldn't help standing in front of the crack. They widened their eyes and looked inside. Even the Taoist who had been thrown out by Ding Nan had forgotten what had happened before, and looked at the situation inside with his mouth agape. They only saw the power of this sword. Although the world was big, no one could match it. And the immovable Wisdom King was known to frighten all demons and evil spirits and sweep away all evil obstacles. The strongest divine sword in the Chinese cultivation world collided with the immovable Wisdom King, the king of all Wisdom Kings and the king of all Wisdom Kings, but no one knew who would win. As soon as this thought came to their minds, they saw Li Yundong holding the Mahamudra, holding the glittering golden Mahamudra and facing the Sanhuang sword. The aura of the golden Mahamudra in the air was condensed and vigorous, as if it were real. Even though Ding Nan and the others were very far away, they felt that the Mahamudra was like a strict golden pagoda wall, unshakable. Seeing that the Mahamudra and the Sanhuang sword were getting closer and closer, they were so nervous that they didn't dare to breathe. Suddenly, as soon as the Mahamudra touched the Sanhuang sword, the golden Mahamudra immediately collapsed. The Sanhuang sword cut down like a hot knife through butter, smashing several Mahamudra in succession and chopping down on the head of Li Yundong's young spirit. Ding Nan was shocked when she saw this. She rushed in without hesitation. Chapter 930. Ding Nan hadn't expected the power of the Sanhuang sword to be so great. Even Li Yundong's mantra Mahamudra, which had always been invincible, couldn't resist it. If ordinary powerful magical weapons hit Li Yundong's young spirit, they would probably be bounced off immediately. Even if there was a more powerful magical weapon that could shatter Li Yundong's young spirit golden body, he could immediately recover. However, the Sanhuang sword was not an ordinary magical weapon. It was a powerful magical weapon personally refined by the Heavenly Lord of the primeval beginning. The 3 human emperors had used this sword to sweep the world and kill demons. In terms of the power of a single sword, the Sanhuang sword was only inferior to the Shenyuan sword and above the 4 immortal swords. If the Sanhuang sword hit Li Yundong, his golden body would probably be unable to recover immediately. His soul would dissipate and he would die. Although Li Yundong had Zhou Qin and Zi Yuan by his side, how could they resist a powerful magical weapon that even Li Yundong couldn't resist? Even Li Yunyang himself hadn't expected that the Sanhuang sword would be so powerful in the hands of Zhang Tongtian, the leader of the Qingqing sect. It had actually reached such a level. When the sword fell, its power was brilliant. The world was filled with sharp sword qi, and the mighty aura of the emperor filled the world. For a moment, although most of the cultivators of the various sects in the Middle Sun were operating the magic formation, they were all stunned and gasped when they saw such an earth-shattering sword. Zhou Ping of the Zhangyi school had followed Zhang Ling here. When she saw Zhang Tongtian jump out to challenge Li Yunyang, she was quite disdainful in her heart, but at this time, she was shocked. She cried out involuntarily, "This Zhang Tongtian is actually so powerful?" Zhang Ling's face was also full of solemnity. She looked up at the sky and said slowly, "You have to know that he is the leader of the Qingqing sect. Besides, this is the Sanhuang sword. It's the sword used by the 3 human emperors, Yao Shu and Yu." The Shenyuan sword was not called the Shenyuan sword at first. It was the Yellow Emperor Shenyuan who used this sword to fight against Qi Yu and won in the end. That was why it was called the Shenyuan sword. The cultivation world also recognized this sword as the best of the divine swords in the world. After the Yellow Emperor Shenyuan, almost every generation of emperors was a great expert in the cultivation world. Some of them were even gods themselves. The earliest Xueqi, Fuxi, and Shenongxi were all powerful gods. Even the descendants of the Yellow Emperor Shenyuan, like Shaohao and Zhuanqiu, were extremely powerful experts. Among them, Zhuanqiu had even fought with the water god Gonggong for the throne. He had beaten the water god to the point that he flew into a rage out of humiliation and crashed into Mount Buzhou. From this, one could see how powerful Zhuanqiu was. Yao Shuanyu was also such a great master. Among them, the 3 emperors had inherited and used the treasured sword of Heavenly Lord of Primordial Beginning. Therefore, later generations of cultivators called this sword Sanhuang sword, ranked after the Shenyuan sword. As the saying goes, those with great reputations do not live up to their name. Moreover, this was an ancient divine sword that had been used by 3 human emperors and had been passed down for thousands of years. At this time, Ise Shenguang and the other Japanese cultivators looked at the Sanhuang sword in shock. They couldn't help but think, God is so kind to China. Why is it so mean to Japan? In the eyes of the Japanese, God had given almost all the best things to the Chinese and almost all the worst things to the Japanese. Therefore, there were few powerful magical weapons in the Japanese cultivation world. There were many talismans, magic, and the art of summoning ghosts. In short, there were more software skills than hardware skills. Although it was said that when the software skills were practiced to the peak, they might not be worse than the hardware skills. Sometimes if the hardware was hard enough, the software skills would not be able to match it. Although Zhang Tongtian was a master of thunder retribution in the Chinese cultivation world, he was not as famous as Zhang Tianshi, the sect master of the Zhangyi school. In terms of strength, he was not as good as Wang Yuanshan, the head of the Linggong sect. If he went to Japan and fought with the Japanese without using powerful magical weapons, he might not even be in the top 10 or even the top 20. But at this time, with the Sanhuang sword in his hand, he could forcibly suppress Li Yunyang. How could this not make people jealous? At this time, it was not only the people in the field who were shocked. Even Zhou Qin and Ding Nan hadn't expected that the power of this sword would be so overwhelming that Li Yunyang couldn't stop it. The 2 of them were shocked and immediately moved their minds. The 9th Heaven Zi Yuan Silk and Qi Wei instantly went to meet the Sanhuang sword. Although the 9th Heaven Zi Yuan Silk and Qi Wei were first-class powerful magical weapons in the cultivation world, compared with the Sanhuang sword, which was as famous as the Shenyuan sword, they were far inferior. Everyone saw that the 9th Heaven Zi Yuan Silk had turned into a thick misty net, but after blocking the Sanhuang sword for a while, it was immediately torn to pieces by the amazing sword Qi of the Sanhuang sword, and then chopped down with amazing momentum. After the 9th Heaven Zi Yuan Silk was torn to pieces, it immediately turned into countless pieces and gathered together in the distance. Although it had returned to its original appearance, for a moment, it only dared to circle in place, not daring to take half a step closer to the Sanhuang sword. Qi Wei was even worse. When it went to meet the Sanhuang sword, it was forced far away by the sharp sword Qi. It couldn't even touch its edge. It was as if a martial arts master had suddenly seen an emperor with his soldiers covering the sky and earth. He was deeply shocked by the majesty and domineering of the emperor. No matter how Zhou Qin commanded him, he didn't dare to move again. The 2 of them could only watch the Sanhuang sword go straight to Li Yunyang's forehead, but there was nothing they could do. Li Yunyang was also suffering. At this time, he was fighting with the Yang spirit. His Yang spirit had to activate his spiritual power, and his real body was also activating his spiritual power to suppress the mystical silver fox in Su Chan's body. It could be said that his divine power had been split in half. How could he resist the Sanhuang sword in Zhang Tongtian's hand? In Li Yunyang's opinion, The power of this sword was so powerful that even the real body of the mystical silver fox wouldn't dare to block it head-on. She could only choose to retreat. At this time, Li Yunyang, who was in the stone room, looked nervous and serious, and there was even a layer of sweat on his forehead. His fingers were flying faster and faster, and the voice of chanting scriptures in his mouth was also getting faster and faster. It was the end of the most critical evil-breaking spell in the Tsurangama Sutra. How could he stop? At this time, Su Chan's expression was also constantly changing. Her expression was one of struggle and pain. It was obvious that she was suffering greatly. Ruan Hongling and Lin Miao, who were watching from the side, were extremely nervous. They didn't even dare to breathe heavily. Outside the cave, Zhang Tongtian's Sanhuang sword once again shattered several big handprints made by Li Yunyang's Yang spirit. The sword was less than 3 meters away from the top of Li Yunyang's head, and Li Yunyang's Yang spirit was about to be smashed into pieces. At this time, Ding Nan suddenly appeared in the field. She clasped the Hell Wuzhong enchanting jade in her sleeve with her 5 fingers, pointed at Zhang Tongtian, and shouted sternly, "Zhang Tongtian!" In an instant, the horrible resentful spirits in the Hell Wuzhong enchanting jade roared out and rushed toward Zhang Tongtian. When Zhang Yuan used the Hell Wuzhong enchanting jade, he had absorbed the souls of several cultivators, most of whom were Yang spirit masters. After falling into Ding Nan's hands, he had absorbed the soul of a Jinshin master, and the power of this sinister magic treasure had also risen. When Ding Nan used the Hell Wuzhong enchanting jade to deal with the mystical silver fox, it could still pose a great threat to her, let alone deal with Zhang Tongtian. When Zhang Tongtian saw the ghost coming at him aggressively, the cold chi made his hair stand on end. The ferocious face of the ghost was so close that it seemed to be stuck to his face. In the blink of an eye, it was about to devour his soul. After all, Zhang Tongtian was a famous master in the Chinese cultivation world and the leader of the Qingqing sect. He immediately retreated more than 10 meters in an instant. At the same time, with a shake of his wrist, the Sanhuang sword, which had already been chopped down, immediately raised its head like a divine dragon. The sword edge cut through the sky and swept toward the ghost of the Hell Wuzhong enchanting jade. This sweep was really like Xingtian waving Gong Qi. It was so powerful that as soon as the powerful ghost of the ghost was touched by the mighty sword Qi, it was like spring snow meeting the scorching sun. In the blink of an eye, it let out an extremely ear-piercing scream and wail, turned into a puff of green smoke, and quickly drilled back into Ding Nan's Hell Wuzhong enchanting jade. Ding Nan's face turned pale with fright. Holding the Hell Wuzhong enchanting jade in her hand, she could even feel the magic treasure trembling in fear. It was the first time she had seen such a domineering magic treasure that could scare the Hell Wuzhong enchanting jade to such an extent. She suddenly entered the scene and helped Li Yundong. It happened so suddenly and so quickly that Zhang Tongtian once again swung his sword toward Li Yundong. It was only 2 seconds later, but in the blink of an eye, Li Yundong had completely completed the last part of the erotic magic breaking spell. After he finished the last Mahamudra, Su Chan's side was already full of glittering Mahamudra runes. Her whole body seemed to be in a huge golden light shield. Su Chan's expression was calm, as if she had fallen asleep. However, her eyelids were trembling slightly, as if she would wake up in the next second. At this time, Li Yundong had finished the spell. His body immediately flashed, and in an instant, he rushed out of the cave and merged with his Yang spirit Jinshin. The people outside the cave saw a figure flash in the cave, and it seemed that a residual shadow had entered Li Yundong's body. Just as Li Yundong's Yang spirit and body merged into one, the Sanhuang sword had once again slashed at Li Yundong's head. But at this time, Li Yundong had already recovered his full strength. As soon as he opened his eyes, the bones all over his body crackled. In an instant, 2 huge arms rose from his shoulders. He clapped his hands and forcibly clamped the Sanhuang sword between his palms. Everyone saw that the 2 arms were blue and black, and the Sanhuang sword between the 2 palms was struggling violently. Its strength was so great that the surrounding air and mountains were shaking. Li Yundong's 2 palms seemed to be clamping a crazily struggling sun. The center of his palms was burning fiercely, and after a while, bursts of thick white mist were emitted. But Li Yundong did not let go at all. He glared at them, and blue flames burned all over his body. In this flame, the 2 original arms slowly stretched out, and little by little, an immovable Wisdom King with vertical pupils and 3 eyes appeared. The immovable Wisdom King held the Sanhuang sword in both hands, and soon 2 more arms grew out of his shoulders. One of his arms was clenched into a fist, and in an instant, a long sword of blue flames appeared in his palm. It was the Vajra wisdom sword, and in the other hand, a Vajra silk rope in the shape of a blue flame belt appeared. As soon as Li Yundong's Wisdom King real body appeared, he immediately blocked the San Huang sword. He glared at Zhang Tongtian and said, "Leader Zhang, your sword has cleansed the devils and deterred the clowns. It is indeed invincible in the world. But look clearly who I am." Li Yundong shouted and exerted force with the two arms holding the San Huang sword. The blue veins on his arms twisted like a group of snakes, and he looked extremely shocked. With the other two arms, he swung the Vajra silk rope with one hand and smashed it toward Zhang Tongtian's head. The other arm holding the Vajra wisdom sword was raised high and slashed down at the San Huang sword. At this moment, everyone on and off the field held their breath. They stared at the collision between the San Huang sword and the Vajra wisdom sword with their eyes wide open. This was not only the collision of the two great divine weapons of Buddhism and Taoism, but also the collision of the Emperor of the Three Emperors and the King of the Kings. But was the San Huang sword of the Emperor of the Three Emperors more powerful, or the immovable Wisdom King of the Wisdom Kings? Alas, I still can't make it in time for the update. Depressing. This is the update on the 30th. Some readers ask me why I only have one update a day recently. Let me explain. Tang, I have been very busy recently. I have a lot of work on hand, and at the end of the year, I really can't write, and I have to prepare a new book. With all kinds of things coming together, I really can't spare the time and energy to update 2 times a day. Everyone, I'm seriously sorry. I think at the end of the year, I'd better try my best to ensure the quality. Chapter 931. At this time, none of the magic treasures around Li Yundong could stop the San Huang sword. Although the Bahuang and Liuha were as famous as the San Huang sword, the mother-child swords were earth-shattering swords when they were not separated. But now that the two swords were separated, their power was greatly reduced. How could they stop the San Huang sword? Even if these two swords blocked in front of him, they would probably end up like the Zhouqianzi Yuan silk and Qi Wei. They would collapse at the first touch, and they might even be cut in half by the sword. As for the burning thumb pot, the immortal pen, and the other magic treasures, although they were all top magic treasures of Buddhism and Taoism, they were not magic treasures for fighting on the spot. If they were used to block the San Huang sword, it would be like asking an office clerk to fight desperately with a gun. They were completely unprofessional. Even Li Yundong's mantra Mahamudra couldn't stop the power of the San Huang sword even if he used it with all his strength. The reason was very simple. The power of the mantra Mahamudra came from people, while the power of the San Huang sword came from heaven and earth and the vast qi between heaven and earth. No matter how powerful a person was, how could he compare with the power of heaven and earth? Therefore, in Li Yundong's opinion, the only thing that could compete with the San Huang sword was the Vajra wisdom sword condensed by the true God's spiritual power of Wisdom King himself. Everyone saw Li Yundong's Wisdom King's real body raise the blazing blue wisdom sword high and slash down at the San Huang sword. Although Zhang Tongtian's San Huang sword was clamped, he couldn't get out. Li Yunyang slashed at the body of the San Huang sword with the Vajra wisdom sword. The power was so fierce that the surrounding air seemed to be burning, and the space was distorted violently. From afar, one could feel a suffocating blazing qi coming toward them. Zhang Tongtian's heart tightened. He turned his wrist, and the San Huang sword immediately cut the palm of his hand with a sharp blade. This move was fierce and hidden, and it was specially used to deal with bare-handed attacks. After all, the sword between the palms was only slightly more than an inch wide. If the sword spun in the palms, it would really be like a drill drilling into the palms. It would immediately turn the palms into a bloody mess, and even the fingers could be drilled off. Although Li Yundong had the Dharmakaya of a true god, he didn't dare to block the edge of the San Huang sword. If he was hit by the sword, his golden body would immediately be broken, and his Zhenfa would be completely exposed. Then he would die. Before Li Yundong sensed the other party's power, he immediately froze and let go of the sword with both hands. As soon as the 3 sovereign swords broke free, they immediately swung towards the Vajra wisdom sword. One was the most powerful divine sword that had been passed down from the ancient era until now, while the other was an artifact transformed from the King of Kings, Akala's divine power true method. Even though the former was a tangible object, while the latter was an intangible object, but the two streaked across the sky, forcibly clashing together, the resulting shockwave was tremendous. "You almost there, boom!" Everyone saw a four-colored halo spread out rapidly, as if an atomic bomb had exploded in mid-air. A strong shock wave shook Tianlong Mountain, causing sand and stones to fly and the wind to blow. Even the 9 golden pillars of light that soared into the sky were shaken and trembled a few times, and the pillars of light became much weaker. Li Yundong and Zhang Tongtian were instantly engulfed by the light wave. Everyone could only hear a loud rumbling sound coming from it. They could vaguely see a blazing blue long sword and the long sword that was emitting green, yellow, and black divine light colliding again and again. It was ear-splitting and deafening. The cultivators in the 10,000 Buddhas worshipping formation saw that something was wrong. It was as if a terrible cannon had exploded in front of them. Every sound was like a cannonball falling on their heads. Not only did it make their ears ring and their eyes dizzy, but it also made their chi and blood fluctuate and their eyes dizzy. They knew that if they didn't cast spells, they would probably be injured by the shock. Those with lower cultivation levels might even be shocked to death. At that moment, the monks of the Ise Shenguang, the Tiantai sect, and the Pure Land True sect in the Japanese cultivation world took the lead in reciting scriptures loudly. The abbots of Shiyuan Temple, Jinshan Temple, Wutai Mountain, and other places in the Chinese cultivation world also recited Buddhist scriptures loudly, using the powerful power of the magic formation to resist the power of the divine sword and Akala. No one knew how long it had been. They only felt an unprecedented loud noise suddenly ring out in the sky, followed by an ear-piercing buzzing sound in the air. The Sanhuang sword drew a few circles in the air, and with a clang, it fell to the ground. The body of the sword kept shaking, and the sword tassel danced wildly. Everyone was shocked. What? The Sanhuang sword had lost? However, although they were surprised, they didn't think it was strange. After all, the magic weapon battle did not only depend on the respective power of the two magic weapons. The power of a magic weapon not only depended on the grade of the magic weapon itself, but also on the strength of the user. The difference in power between a Yang Spirit Master using the Sanhuang sword and a Thunder Retribution Master using the Sanhuang sword was like heaven and earth. But if it was used by a master in the 9th heaven realm, the realm would be different. They were afraid that even Li Yundong wouldn't be able to win. Once the cultivation of magic power reached the pinnacle of the realm, all tricks and moves were like fleeting clouds. When the 3 sovereign sword and the Vajra wisdom sword clashed, there was nothing fancy at all. Both sides did not care about techniques or moves. It was completely a clash of strength against strength, a clash of strength against strength. The stronger one sat high in the clouds, while the weaker one was beaten down to the mortal world. Just like Sun Xinghe Shintong's skills, he had 72 changes. The power of the golden hoop bang in his hand was amazing, and his whole body was made of copper and iron, and he was indestructible. But even so, when he met Buddha, with a flip of his wrist, the overwhelming power immediately beat him to the ground. He couldn't use any Shintong magic power, and all the changes were useless. It was almost there. This was the most typical example of one man's strength defeating 10 men. The Vajra wisdom sword in Li Yundong's hand represented the highest power and the strongest divine power of Wisdom King. It had a strong magic power that could burn everything. In terms of grade and strength, the Sanhuang sword was not inferior to the Vajra wisdom sword, but the gap between its master and Li Yundong's strength was too big. Therefore, after a few rounds of competition, it was beaten to the ground by the Vajra wisdom sword, making a buzzing sound unwillingly. At this time, everyone looked up into the sky and saw that Li Yundong's 3 eyes were still shining with divine light. He was majestic, holding the Vajra wisdom sword in one hand, and the Vajra rope in the other hand trapped Zhang Tongtian's whole body in it, like a cage of blue flames. Zhang Tongtian sat cross-legged in it, pinching his fingers and chanting incantations. He used all his zhenqi and spiritual power to resist the burning and devouring of the blue hellfire. His expression was painful, and his whole body had already been ignited by the blue hellfire. It seemed that his soul would be burned to ashes in the next second. Seeing this scene, Zhang Huashui's eyes immediately turned red. He roared and rushed toward Li Yundong. Although Zhou Qin and Zi Yuan couldn't resist the divine power of the Sanhuang sword, it was easy for them to stop Zhang Huashui. In an instant, the two of them appeared in Zhang Huashui's path. Like 2 doors, they blocked his way. Zhang Huashui was hot-tempered. He immediately roared, waved his fists and rushed toward the two of them. But at this moment, Li Yundong opened his eyes. The Vajra rope was like a flaming whip. It swung toward Zhang Huashui and tied him up like a dumpling. Then, it lifted him high and smashed him heavily to the ground. Zhang Huashuai fell to the ground and smashed a big hole in the ground. However, he was a Jinshin master. As long as the Jinshin was not broken, the human body furnace would not be damaged. He quickly jumped up again and looked at his body in surprise. It seemed that he could not understand why he was still unscathed after being burned by the blue hellfire all around him. But after all, he was the second in command of the Qingqing sect and a Jinshin master. Soon, he understood that Li Yundong's Shentong cultivation had reached the pinnacle. The blue hellfire, which could burn everything, was also controlled to perfection. He was able to control the flames not to burn his Jinshin, let alone hurt his body. That was why he was unharmed. Otherwise, he would have been destroyed in body and soul just now. Zhang Huashuai raised his head in shock, only to see that the flame cage around Zhang Tongtian had disappeared. The leader of the Qingqing sect swayed in mid-air and then fell down. Zhang Huashuai immediately rushed forward and hugged Zhang Tongtian, who was falling in mid-air. He cried anxiously, "Senior brother, Leader Shixiang, how are you?" Zhang Tongtian's face was full of pain. His mouth trembled, and he struggled to take a deep breath. He stood up, looked at Li Yundong with a complicated look in his eyes, and said, "Zhenren Li, I'm ashamed of my inferiority. Thank you for your guidance." After that he fell down on his back. Zhang Huashuai let out a sorrowful cry and immediately used his hand to feel Zhang Tongtian's pulse. Upon touching it, he discovered that Zhang Tongtian was only severely overdrawn in true yuan and magic power, and was not in any life-threatening danger. Only then did he relax. Li Yundong had defeated Zhang Tongtian and the Sanhuang sword. At this time, his power was unprecedentedly high. He glared at the 10,000 Buddhas worshipping formation at the foot of the mountain and sneered, "You want to summon the Buddha to deal with me? Wishful thinking." With a loud shout, Li Yundong quickly pinched his fingers and made several Mahamudra toward the sky. In an instant, the whole sky turned into a rolling sea of blue fire, and the 9 golden beams of light were forcibly blocked by the sea of fire. At this time, everyone present saw the 9 golden beams of light go straight into the sea of blue fire, like clay oxen sinking into the sea. It was impossible to break through this layer of fire, let alone tear apart the chasm between the human world and the heaven realm. Li Yundong relied on his powerful spiritual energy of the true God to forcibly block the power of the 10,000 Buddhas worshipping formation in mid-air, which was equivalent to cutting off all the thoughts of everyone. It could even be said that if Li Yundong's killing intent was aroused at this time and the blue hellfire was introduced into the magic formation, it could immediately burn 2/3 of the cultivators here. Only a small number of cultivators could escape. What these cultivators were most afraid of was that their lives were in the hands of others. As the saying went, they were at the mercy of others. This was the most taboo thing for cultivators. But at this time, they really had a sense of despair. They looked at Li Yundong with fear in their eyes, but they didn't know what he was going to do. Li Yundong didn't want to have too many grudges with these cultivators. This could be seen from the fight between him and Zhang Tongtian. He also knew that even if he defeated all the cultivators, if he made too deep a blood feud, even if Su Chan recovered, it would be very difficult for him in the future. Even if he could ascend, so could Su Chan. But what about Zi Yuan? What about Zhou Qin? What about their families? Would they be attacked by the cultivation world together? This was also the reason why the higher the cultivation level of a cultivator was, the more they pretended to be weak and stayed in seclusion all day. Because they were too strong, a little carelessness could lead to a person's death. Even if they were not afraid, they couldn't help thinking about their relatives, friends, disciples, and descendants, so they had to be merciful. Li Yundong used the blue sea of fire to block the spiritual energy of the 10,000 Buddhas worshipping formation, but he soon heard a buzzing explosion behind him. Guan Hongling and Lin Miao were abruptly shaken out of the stone room by a huge force. Guan Hongling was still able to barely stabilize her body after rolling in the air, but Lin Miao fell straight down the mountain. Zhou Qin was quick to rescue her and save her life. When Li Yundong heard the movement behind him, his heart trembled. He knew that Su Chan must have woken up and broken free from his magic formation. Li Yundong, who had an all-powerful cultivation base, couldn't help but feel extremely nervous at this time. His body trembled slightly as he looked at Su Chan, feeling a little nervous and scared. He watched Su Chan slowly walk out of the passage of the stone room, dragging 9 wildly dancing golden foxtails behind her. At this time, Su Chan's face was still delicate, but her eyes were still blood red. The foxtails behind her were like a waterfall, And she was very beautiful. She glanced around lightly, and then slowly fixed her eyes on Li Yundong. Li Yundong looked at Su Chan and felt that this face was extremely familiar, but there was a sense of strangeness in it. His heart skipped a beat, and he became more and more panicked, but after all, he still held a trace of hope and luck. He tentatively said in a trembling voice, "Channer, is that you?" Su Chan's eyes moved, and suddenly she giggled. Her voice was filled with indescribable sarcasm. "Channer? Wisdom King, I'm not your Channer." At this time, Li Yundong's heart suddenly fell to the bottom of the valley. His whole body was cold to the bone, and his whole body shook in the air. His chest seemed to have been punched heavily by someone. He hissed in shock and anger. "This is impossible." The Een-colored demon-breaking spell of the Surangama Sutra is specialized in destroying all evil spirits in the world. It's impossible for you to succeed. There was no doubt that at this time, Su Chan's body had been occupied by the mystical silver fox. The mystical silver fox laughed proudly. Her laughter was sharp, ear-piercing, and extremely arrogant. She stood in the air without any defense, as if she regarded the immovable Wisdom King and the heroes of the world as nothing. After laughing wildly for a while, the mystical silver fox suddenly stopped laughing. Her face was as cold as water, and she said in a cold voice, "Wisdom King, let me ask you, am I a devil?" In addition. There are a few twists and turns. After all, there is no high point without a low point. The final outcome is good. Rest in peace, everyone. Chapter 932. The mystical silver fox's words immediately stopped Li Jiandong. Li Yundong's mind was buzzing with these words. Am I a demon? Li Yundong had read a lot of history books and classics in the spirit space of the burning thumb pot, so he naturally knew the true origin of the Fox Zen sect. Nine-tailed foxes weren't actually monsters. On the contrary, almost all of them were divine creatures. Back in the ancient times, they were divine beasts that were deeply revered by the people of that time. Among them, the nine-tailed white fox Tushan married Yu the Great, who had conquered the flood. Yu the Great even gave birth to the first emperor of China's slave society, Xueqi. Before the Zhou dynasty, the nine-tailed fox clan had always been one of the god clans with extremely high divinity and status. However, because Su Daji was involved in the Great War of Investiture of the Gods, the nine-tailed fox clan was erased from the heaven realm by Patriarch Hong Jun and was reduced to a demon. From then on, they could no longer enter the heaven realm and could only survive in the human world. But even so, even though the nine-tailed fox clan had been repeatedly belittled and discredited by the people of Zhou, this did not change the people's worship and faith towards the nine-tailed fox clan. Even during the Qin, Han, the Three Kingdoms, and even during the Wei, Jin, and Northern and Southern dynasties, the nine-tailed fox was still a sacred symbol. During the Han dynasty, stone carvings of the nine-tailed fox, white rabbits, toads, three-legged crows, and other mythical beasts were often carved in front of the throne of the Queen Mother of the West to show her good fortune. During the Wei, Jin, and Northern and Southern dynasties, it was recorded in the Annals of Wei, 18th Ling Zheng, 8 times. Southern Qingzhou presents the second white fox. 3rd year, June, Pingyang County presents the white fox. 8th year, Guang Prefecture presents the nine-tailed fox. 4th year, May, Pingyang County presents the white fox. 4th year, April, Shaojing Kingdom presents the white fox. 7th year, Guang Prefecture presents the nine-tailed fox. From this, it could be seen that the appearance of the nine-tailed fox was an auspicious sign. Although the Zhou dynasty's Lu Shang and King Wu had worked tirelessly to discredit the nine-tailed fox, they were unable to change the deep-rooted belief and worship in the hearts of the people towards the nine-tailed fox. This situation lasted until the Tang dynasty, until the appearance of the mystical silver fox completely changed the world's impression of the nine-tailed fox. In order to fulfill the last wish of Su Daji's ancestors, the rock ancestor had gathered the power of the nine-tailed fox clan and established the Fox Zen sect. Subsequently, the nine-tailed fox clan became unprecedentedly united, seriously infringing on the interests of other cultivation sections. When the mystical silver fox appeared, all the major cultivation sects trembled in fear under the terrifying phantom of the mystical silver fox. Even the gods in the heaven realm could not sit still. The immovable Wisdom King descended to the world in an attempt to kill the mystical silver fox. After that, the mystical silver fox was defeated by the cultivators of the Chinese cultivation world. She fled to the east alone, leaving the Fox Zen sect without a group of foxes. She completely fell into the era of being surrounded and chased by the Chinese cultivation world. The appearance of the mystical silver fox sounded the alarm bell in the Chinese cultivation world. Therefore, from then on, the disciples of Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism in the Chinese cultivation world began to devote themselves to a huge and long-term project, to discredit the nine-tailed celestial fox until they could never turn over. After the 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms period, in the northern Song dynasty, the image of the nine-tailed celestial fox had completely declined. Among them, Tian Kuang's Confucian public discussion said that Chen Pengnian was cunning and good at seducing the emperor during the time of Emperor Zhenzong of Song. Therefore, people at that time regarded him as a seductive person like the nine-tailed fox. It could be seen that no one in the nine-tailed fox clan regarded them as the god clan and the Zhanxiang divine beast. When the investiture of the gods appeared in the middle of the Ming dynasty, the nine-tailed fox clan was completely unable to rise again. They were deeply branded as foxes. All the women in the world who seduced men were equated with foxes, and were equated with lowly prostitutes. However, the world called foxes demons, but it did not mean that the nine-tailed fox clan was indeed demons and monsters. The sacred bloodline of the nine-tailed fox clan passed down from the Tushan clan would not be diluted because of the passage of time, the transmission of the race, and the abuse of the world. The god clan would always be the god clan, and the divine beast would always be the divine beast. Even if everyone in the world disdained and scolded them for 100 or 1,000 years, it could not change an objective fact. The nine-tailed fox had been the Zhanxiang divine beast of China since ancient times, and it had extremely powerful divine power. Therefore, although the evil-breaking spell in the Psurangama Sutra was powerful and could be said to be able to break 50 kinds of demons, the mystical silver fox was the bloodline of the god clan, an ancient divine beast clan. How could she really be a demon? How could Li Yundong's spell have any effect on her? The words of the mystical silver fox made Li Yundong fall to the bottom of the valley. He knew that it was impossible for him to drive the mystical silver fox out of Su Chan's body with his own strength. His power was specially used to restrain demons and ghosts, but at this time, the mystical silver fox's 3 souls and 7 spirits had already gathered together. Her godhead was extremely high, and her divine power was even more amazing. She was not inferior to him at all. How could he drive the soul of the mystical silver fox out of Su Chan's body? At this time, the mystical silver fox was occupying Su Chan's body. Li Yundong fought with her, but he was afraid of hurting her. His strength was too great. If he hurt or even broke Su Chan's body, what should he do? But his strength was too small, and it was impossible for him to defeat the mystical silver fox. Moreover, at this time, the mystical silver fox had already obtained the most perfect true body of the heavenly fox. Her strength was so great that it could shake heaven and earth. If Li Yundong didn't use all his energy to deal with her, he would most likely be knocked down by the mystical silver fox without any suspense. When the mystical silver fox saw that Li Yundong was staring at her blankly, his eyes were empty, and his whole spirit was in a trance, she knew that Li Yundong's spirit was on the verge of collapse. He couldn't accept the fact that Su Chan's body had been occupied by him and her soul had been devoured. The mystical silver fox was very happy. She laughed and said, "Wisdom King, in the last life, you betrayed me, deceived me, destroyed my soul, and caused me to be sealed. In this life, I will let you have a taste of what I have tasted. However, since I promised my clone in this life not to be your enemy, I, the mystical silver fox, will keep my promise. I won't care about the past grudges with you. Look at you now. I'm afraid that a small master of thunder retribution can knock you down. It's not worth it for me, the mystical silver fox, to do it." As the mystical silver fox spoke, her eyes swept over the cultivators of various sects at the foot of the mountain. She couldn't help sneering and saying, "The 10,000 Buddhas greeting formation? How bold and generous. I never saw such a magic formation before. I didn't expect to see it today." The blazing blood-red eyes of the mystical silver fox suddenly ignited with raging flames, like 2 burning fireballs. Her voice was ferocious, and she said with a murderous look, "Since so many people are here, it saves me the trouble of looking for you one by one. None of you can leave today." At this time, when the cultivators of various sects saw the appearance of the mystical silver fox, they were all shocked, especially the cultivators of various sects in Japan. One by one, they looked at the sky in despair and fear. In the battle with Xueqi, when the mystical silver fox was not in a perfect body, she had almost wiped them out. At this time, the mystical silver fox had completely recovered her divine power, and the only one who could compete with her, the immovable Wisdom King, was stunned like a clay puppet at this time. What was more frightening was that no one could tell whether he was an enemy or a friend. If he joined forces with the mystical silver fox, I'm afraid. When everyone thought of this, they shivered and their bodies trembled. They knew that if this happened, it would be the end of the world. It was really the saying that if the silver fox was reborn, the world would be in chaos. But at this time, Li Yundong's spirit was greatly injured and hit, and the previous Wisdom King's Fa's hen also disappeared. The light pillars in the sky that blocked the 9 rays of golden divine light were no longer blocked, and once again soared into the sky. A cultivator who reacted quickly immediately said loudly, "Everyone, whether we cultivators live or die today is right in front of us." After that, he recited the incantation scriptures loudly. For a moment, everyone was united, and the 10,000 Buddhas worshipping formation began to rumble, with amazing momentum. Seeing this, the mystical silver fox laughed angrily and said, "Struggle before death." Her figure flashed and immediately rushed toward these cultivators. In the magic formation, a few lightning retribution masters immediately came up to stop the mystical silver fox, desperately trying to buy time for the operation of the magic formation. Before the mystical silver fox's spiritual power reached its peak, she had already defeated them. What's more, she was now in the perfect real body of the heavenly fox. Even if Wang Yuanshan came, he would probably be defeated in a few rounds. For a moment, the mystical silver fox rushed into the arena. The 9 golden fox tails first shrank, and then suddenly exploded. The fox silk stabbed at them like an explosion. In just one encounter, these lightning retribution masters were all pierced through, and then they were pulled into pieces by the golden fox silk. Their bodies and souls were destroyed. When everyone saw this scene, they couldn't help but feel a burst of horror and despair. Another group of them rose into the air and went to meet the mystical silver fox tragically. At this time, the cultivators of the various sects in the Middle Sun saw that these lightning retribution masters were still suppressed by the mystical silver fox and had no room to fight back. The only one who could compete with the mystical silver fox, the reincarnated Wisdom King, was standing aside in a daze, motionless. Some of them still held hope, such as Xueqi, and shouted, "Your Highness, do you want to watch the cultivation world perish?" Xueqi's voice was crisp and clear, and it reached Li Yundong's ears. Li Yundong's body shook violently, and his eyes gradually focused. He watched helplessly as the mystical silver fox killed everyone on the field. The blood mist in the air was so thick that it was difficult to dissipate, and the air was full of the pungent smell of blood. He murmured in a low voice, "It shouldn't be like this, it shouldn't be like this. It can't be like this." Xueqi took the lead in shouting, and the other cultivators also shouted at Li Yundong, "Your Highness, hurry up and subdue the demons." Li Yundong's body shook again. He looked down at his hands. He knew that his hands had earth-shattering power. If there was anyone on the field who could compete with the mystical silver fox, it must be him. But if he really made a move, together with the cultivators of the cultivation world in the Middle Sun, the mystical silver fox would definitely not be his match. She would definitely be defeated or even killed. But if the mystical silver fox dies... Suchan, what about the girl? Little girl said that she wanted to live happily with me for the rest of her life. She said not to leave me. Li Yundong felt that his whole body was about to be torn in half. The heaven and man were fighting in his mind, and he was in extreme pain. However, when Li Yundong hesitated, there were also some cultivators who had bad intentions towards Li Yundong. At this time, they were even more desperate. For example, Wan Jinyuan, they shouted, "Li Yundong has been bewitched by this demon girl. He has always been on the same side as this demon girl. We have all been deceived." At this time, there was a stir in the crowd. The mystical silver fox laughed out loud. Her laughter was full of mockery and sarcasm. The wise king listened to it. Listen to it. This is a human being. This is a shameless human being who can turn the world upside down in the mortal world. In my opinion, the wise king, why don't we kill all these people together and then kill our way to the 9th heaven together? We can kill to our heart's content. If the two of us join forces, we will definitely sweep the world. Even in the 9th heaven, no one can stop us. From now on, the two of us will share the world equally. You can have whatever you want. You can have whatever women you like. What do you think? Li Yundong's body shook, and he couldn't help but look at the mystical silver fox. At this time, Xueqi and Zi Yuan were shocked and exclaimed at the same time, "No! The day after tomorrow, I will go to the capital on business. I will try my best to ensure that I keep updating it. In addition, there are readers who wait until midnight. I apologize again. I didn't make it clear. If nothing happens to this book, it will probably be updated every day until the end of the book, because there are too many things to do, and I have to prepare a new book, so I can't hurry up. I'm sorry. A reader asked me what the name of the new book is. It's not that I don't want to say it, but that after I say it, I'm afraid that someone will maliciously register the name of the book. Then I will drink a cup." Chapter 933. The words of the mystical silver fox not only shocked Li Yundong, but also shocked Zhou Qin and Zi Yuan. The cultivators of Zhongyang were even more shocked. They knew that if Li Yundong was really like what the mystical silver fox had said, it would definitely be an unprecedented catastrophe in the world. Unless the Buddha came in person, no one in the world could stop the two of them. Therefore, for a moment, the cultivators of all sects were shocked and angry. They looked at Li Yundong in despair. At this time, everyone looked at Li Yundong in unison. For a moment, the scene was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop, as if they were waiting for a judgment of fate. At this time, Li Yundong looked at Zhou Qin and Zi Yuan beside him. His eyes were painful and complicated. He saw that the two confidants were looking at him in horror and fear, as if they were afraid that he would fall into the evil path in the next second and never recover. Li Yundong took a deep look at them, then withdrew his gaze and looked at the mystical silver fox. He said slowly, "Mystical silver fox, I won't let you destroy all the beautiful things around me. I don't care what you want to do, but if you involve the people around me, you have to step on my dead body." At this time, when the cultivators of the Zhongyang cultivation world heard this, they were immediately overjoyed and relieved. Many people breathed a sigh of relief, as if their souls had returned to their bodies. However, the mystical silver fox was furious and shouted, "Wisdom King, you are really shameless. Do you really think I'm afraid of you?" Li Yundong said with a sullen face, "Mystical silver fox, why don't we have a one-on-one fight? If you win, you give Su Chan's body and soul back to me. If you lose, I'll let you do whatever you want to me. What do you think?" The mystical silver fox laughed angrily and said, "Wisdom King, are you daydreaming? Don't you know that I, the mystical silver fox, keep my promise and promise Su Chan not to be your enemy? Aren't you afraid that even if you win, in the end, your precious lover's body will be smashed into pieces?" Li Yundong's face changed. He gritted his teeth and his whole body trembled involuntarily. The mystical silver fox's words hit his soft ribs. He gritted his teeth and said, "Mystical silver fox, what do you want?" The mystical silver fox sneered and said, "What do I want? I want to kill all these hypocritical cultivators, and then kill my way up to the 9 heavens. I want to kill all these hypocritical gods who are full of moral lies." The mystical silver fox looked murderously at the cultivators of Zhongri under her feet. She sneered and said, "Wisdom King, since you want to sympathize with these hypocritical guys, it seems that you are the same as them. You are all jackals of the same lair. Since you don't want to make a move, then watch me kill all the way to the 9 heavens." After that, the mystical silver fox raised her head and roared, "You bastards, what you have owed me for the past 1,000 years, return it all to me today." Everyone saw a flash of golden light and went straight into the 10,000 Buddhas worshipping formation. For a moment, some of the golden fox tails in the formation suddenly soared into the sky, like a sharp pillar rising from the ground to the sky. There were a few cultivators who were constantly struggling after being pierced by the sharp fox silk. There were also fox tails sweeping the ground like wild snakes. Every time they swept, a group of cultivators flew out with a miserable howl. Their tendons were broken, their bones were broken, and their skin was torn. Some of them were even swept into several pieces. They died miserably on the spot without making a sound, and their bodies and souls were destroyed. Looking at the terrible massacre below, Zhou Qin and Zi Yuan trembled uncontrollably. They wanted to help, but without Li Yundong's restraint, the two of them would still die. They might even be like the cultivators who had died tragically. They would be turned into ashes as soon as they met. The two of them looked at the mystical silver fox anxiously and fearfully, and from time to time, they kept turning their heads to look at Li Yundong. Zhou Qin said anxiously, "Master, what should we do?" Su Chan was Li Yundong's Achilles' heel. When he was not involved in these things, Li Yundong was the invincible wisdom king who could not be moved by the wind. But when it came to Su Chan, Li Yundong changed from a god to a human being. Li Yundong clenched his fists tightly, and the steel teeth in his mouth almost shattered. There was a crazy voice in his heart desperately shouting, "What should I do? What should I do?" His reason told him, "You should go down to stop the mystical silver fox and prevent her from killing more people." But Li Yundong looked at the mystical silver fox's every move and raised her hand. It was clearly the little girl's voice, smile, words and deeds. How could he do it? On one side was justice, and on the other side was affection. The most painful thing in the world was this. At this time, the cultivators of the various sects in Zhongyang had been killed by the mystical silver fox. Blood flowed like a river on the field. Feikong, the monk of Shiyuan Temple, rushed to the abbot, Master Purin, and said in fear and anxiety, "Master, the devil is growing. Hurry up and leave. Let the disciples stop the mystical silver fox." Although Purin had encountered a great change, he did not panic. He just looked at the killing scene around him with vicissitudes of life and pity. He put his palms together and said in a sad and painful voice, "Go? If the evil and crooked ways become the right way, where can I go, although the world is big?" Feikong was very anxious and said, "Master, our Shiyuan temple can't do without you. If you are unlucky, our Shiyuan temple, which has been burning incense for 800 years, will be cut off." Purin laughed and said with emotion, "How can the 800 years of incense in Shiyuan temple exist because of my existence? As the saying goes, there is no Bodhi tree, and the mirror is not a platform. There is nothing in the world, so where does the dust come from?" Feikong didn't have the same level as Purin. Seeing that his master was still in the mood to recite Buddhist poems at the critical moment of life and death, he couldn't help but be anxious like an ant on a hot pot. He squatted down and wanted to carry Purin on his back. "Master, at this time you are still talking about Buddhist secrets? Hurry up, our Shiyuan temple can't do without you." However, when Feikong carried him hard, he felt that Purin's whole body was as heavy as a mountain. Although he was a famous strong man of Shiyuan temple, when he carried him hard, Purin didn't move at all. Purin shook his head, sighed, and said to Feikong, "Feikong, I usually say that you are not perceptive enough, and it will be difficult for you to inherit my mantle." Seeing that he couldn't carry Purin, Feikong knew that his master had the will to die and was determined to die. With tears streaming down his face, he knelt in front of Purin, kowtowed like pounding garlic, and said, "Master, I have never thought of inheriting your mantle. I only hope to be by your side all my life. Wherever you go, I will go. Since Master is determined to die, then disciple will die with Master." Purin was furious and shouted, "Nonsense! If you die with me, who will preach in the future? Who will inherit the incense and mantle of Shiyuan temple?" Feikong said with tears streaming down his face, "Master, if the devil succeeds, where will there be a pure land in the world? Where is there a place for us to take shelter? When the nest is overturned, how can there be intact eggs? Instead of hiding, it is better for us to die with Master today." At this time, the disciples of Shiyuan temple couldn't help but burst into tears and said, "Master, disciple is determined to die with you." Wu Hua, who had been following Purin, also let out a long sigh. He put his palms together, looked up at the sky, and said slowly, "Amit-ba. Put down the butcher's knife and become a Buddha on the spot." Purin looked at them, and he couldn't help but burst into tears. He sat cross-legged. Although tears flowed down his wrinkled face, his expression gradually became solemn. He recited in a deep voice, "Put down the butcher's knife and become a Buddha on the spot." The disciples of Shiyuan temple also sat cross-legged and followed Purin in chanting loudly, "Put down the butcher's knife and become a Buddha on the spot." They were originally cultivators who had been carefully selected by the Shiyuan temple with great willpower. At this time, they were about to die. Their voices were righteous and their words were kind. Although they were in the Shuraba, where the murderous spirit was soaring and blood was flowing all over the ground, they revealed a dignified, solemn, and fearless aura of Buddha. Their fearless spirit influenced the cultivators of various sects around them. The cultivators of various sects, who were still afraid and resisting, were now very calm. One by one, they sat down cross-legged and chanted in unison, "Put down the butcher's knife and become a Buddha on the spot." The cultivators of the Japanese cultivation world were also infected by this tragic and unusual atmosphere. Everyone burst into tears and looked excited. They all sat down cross-legged and chanted, "Put down the butcher's knife and become a Buddha on the spot." For a time, the cultivators of all sects on the field recited the same sentence in unison. Their voices shook the sky and resounded throughout the world. When the mystical silver fox heard the majestic chanting full of Buddhist power, she couldn't help laughing angrily and said, "Put down the butcher's knife. You guys know that you raised the butcher's knife first. As the saying goes, good will be rewarded, evil will be punished. It's not that the time hasn't come yet. It's only right and proper to pay back the debt from 1,000 years ago. You want to become a Buddha on the spot? Well, I'll fulfill your wish." The mystical silver fox's figure was like a gust of wind and lightning. She madly rushed toward Purin, where the chanting was the loudest. Wherever she passed, the nine-tailed golden fox was like a meat grinder, twisting the cultivators around her into countless pieces. The place she passed was like an alley dug out by blood. The ground was covered with broken limbs and internal organs. It was ferocious and terrifying. The aura around her body was boiling like a raging flame. Although there was a rain of blood around her, her body was still spotless. Her beautiful and delicate face was full of murderous intent. She raised her white hands high and chopped at Purin's head. Purin fixed his eyes on the mystical silver fox and recited the last sentence in his mouth. "Put down the butcher's knife and become a Buddha on the spot." At this time, the mystical silver fox chopped down with her palm. The saber in her palm forced Purin's whole body to explode and turn into a cloud of blood mist. In an instant, the cultivators of all sects were speechless when they saw Purin's miserable state. Only the mystical silver fox was left standing there and laughing wildly. "Bald donkey. Have you become a Buddha?" For a moment, everyone was extremely sad and indignant. They shouted in unison again, "Put down the butcher's knife and become a Buddha. Put down the butcher's knife and become a Buddha." His voice was as fierce as it. However, the mystical silver fox didn't seem to hear it. She was still laughing wildly. Her voice was sharp and high-pitched. Even in the angry chanting, it could still be heard clearly, "A bunch of idiots. Become a Buddha for me." As soon as the mystical silver fox finished speaking, there was a loud bang in the sky. Then, a golden light shone down in the direction of the mystical silver fox, as if the light of Buddha had descended to the world. At the same time, there was a majestic and distant chanting in the air. "Wang Mani Padme Hum." This Buddhist chant immediately attracted everyone's attention. Everyone looked up and saw a crack slowly opening up in the thick clouds in the sky. This crack was overflowing with golden light. The Buddhist chant in the air seemed to be coming from the other side of the western heaven. It was ancient and long, sacred and solemn, causing people to feel a sense of reverence and awe when they heard it. They wanted nothing more than to prostrate themselves before it. In this golden light, a figure slowly appeared. This person was sitting on the lotus platform, dressed in white, holding a clean bottle in one hand and a willow in the other. He was surrounded by colorful divine light and looked majestic. It was mighty man Avalokitesvara. Everyone was stunned at first, and then they were ecstatic. Avalokitesvara Bodhisattva. Avalokitesvara Bodhisattva has appeared. But before they could cheer loudly, another figure appeared in the sky. This person was sitting on the stone platform, wearing a red cassock and a golden crown. He held a cane in one hand and an alms bowl in the other. It was Ksitagarbha Bodhisattva. When the mystical silver fox saw Guanyin Bodhisattva appear, she first showed a sarcastic expression. But when Ksitagarbha Bodhisattva appeared, she couldn't help but be stunned. Then she saw Manjushri Bodhisattva and Samantabhadra Bodhisattva appear one by one. Then, a golden Buddha loomed in the clouds. This great Buddha had a dignified appearance, with 99 sariras on top of his head. His body was surrounded by 9-colored divine radiance, and beneath him was a 9-colored 9-layered lotus throne. Every layer of the lotus throne was constantly wrapping and blossoming, forming crystal-clear lotus pods. Then, the lotus pods would wither, and the white lotus seeds would scatter down. Then, these lotus seeds would quickly grow, forming young flower buds, and the cycle would repeat endlessly. When the mystical silver fox saw the Buddha at a glance, the contempt on her face disappeared in an instant. Instead, it was replaced by an extremely serious look. She clenched her fists and said slowly in a low voice, "Tathagata Buddha?" As soon as she finished speaking, Tathagata Buddha had completely appeared in the clouds. At this time, other gods appeared densely in the clouds. They were obviously 500 arhats and 3,000 vajras. Chapter 934. The appearance of the Tathagata Buddha had completely reversed the situation on the field. Almost all the people in the cultivation world couldn't believe their eyes. Even they didn't know whether it was the 10,000 Buddhas worshipping formation that had appeared, or whether it was Master Purin of the Shiyuan temple who had sacrificed his life for righteousness. His fearless spirit had moved the Buddha and made the Buddha appear. None of them knew, and no one had thought about it at this time. At this time, the cultivation world of the Middle Sun was shocked by the scene in front of them. Everyone looked up at the sky with their mouths agape. Even the mystical silver fox widened her eyes and stared at the gods and Buddhas in the sky vigilantly. She said word by word between her teeth, "Buddha, you finally couldn't help showing up." The figure of the mystical silver fox slowly rose from the mountain of corpses and the sea of blood. Her 9 golden fox tails were twisting in the air, wild and unruly. Even in the face of the Tathagata Buddha, she did not lower her body or her momentum at all. The mystical silver fox looked at the figures of the gods and Buddhas one by one. When she saw Manjushri Bodhisattva, she couldn't help laughing and said, well, it's just the right time to settle all the accounts together. Do you think I'm afraid of you just because you have so many people?" The mystical silver fox raised her head and laughed wildly. "I, the mystical silver fox, have always fought against many people alone. When have I ever been afraid?" As soon as she finished speaking, another golden light fell from the sky, splitting a gap on one side of the sky. In this gap, the golden light flowed down like running water. Every time it flowed down a layer, it formed a golden staircase. Every time a staircase appeared, there were gods with jade brilliance all over their bodies. The mystical silver fox saw that the first god who appeared was riding a green ox. He had white hair and a ruddy face. He was dressed in a yin-yang Taoist robe and a high-crowned Taoist hat. He was holding a cattail leaf fan in one hand and a gourd in the other. He was Taishang Lao Jun, one of the 3 pure ones. Following that, 2 other people appeared on the stairs. One of them was riding on a hornless horse with only one leg. Its roar was like thunder and its body was shimmering brightly. It was the Kuei Nyo. This person wore a red Taoist robe and there were 3 red halos behind him. 3 divine swords surrounded him. He held the primordial dipper in one hand and the golden dragon scissors in the other. He was the prime Qing Lingbao Tianzuan, Tong Tian Order Master. Besides sect leader Tong Tian, a man was sitting in an agar-wood chariot, which was pulled by 9 divine dragons of different colors. It was the famous 9 dragons agar-wood chariot. The man in the chariot was wearing a yellow and white Taoist robe, holding a horsetail whisk in one hand and a mirror in the other. He was heavenly primogenitor. The 3 pure ones followed closely behind the Buddha. As soon as the Tathagata Buddha appeared, its power was even more astonishing. The mystical silver fox's face also changed, and there was a hint of shock and fear in her eyes. She didn't expect that all the gods and Buddhas in the sky would appear together at this time. The 3 pure ones stood on the golden platform and looked down at the people in the desert. Although the cultivators at the foot of Tianlong Mountain all raised their heads and stared at the 3 pure ones in the sky with wide eyes, they could only see the brilliance of their bodies. They could only see their mounts, the figures on them, and the magical items in their hands, but they couldn't see their faces clearly. But everyone felt that whether it was the 3 pure ones or the gods and Buddhas in the sky, they were all looking at the humble life in the world with a kind of cold and disdainful eyes. Although they were all cultivators with incomparable power, at this moment, they felt that they were so humble, so insignificant. No matter how strong the mystical silver fox was, she could not face the gods and Buddhas and the 3 pure ones. She, who had always been fearless, finally showed a trace of unwillingness in her eyes. Her voice gradually became gloomy. "The 3 pure ones are also here? Well, it's getting more and more lively." However, the mystical silver fox was the mystical silver fox after all. She was the most rebellious, heaven-defying and tyrannical 9-tailed celestial fox in the Chinese cultivation world for thousands of years. Although she was shocked in the face of the gods and Buddhas alone, she was not afraid or timid because of it. On the contrary, the mystical silver fox shouted and took the initiative to launch a fierce attack on the gods and Buddhas in the sky. Everyone saw that the 9 fox tails behind the mystical silver fox rose into the sky like 9 wild dragons. With a sudden shake, Countless fox silks fell toward the gods and Buddhas in the sky like a rain of steel needles. As soon as the countless fox silks were spat out, they immediately turned into countless nine-tailed celestial foxes. Each of them was ferocious and rushed toward the gods and Buddhas in the sky. This was the great magical power of the eight great freedom of Buddhism, which could be incarnated into thousands of people. The cultivators of all sects on Tianlong Mountain were stunned. They saw that the mystical silver fox dared to take the initiative to attack in the face of the gods and Buddhas in the sky. They were really shocked by the strength of this big devil. If it weren't for the deep hatred between the two sides, someone would have worshipped the mystical silver fox on the spot. Although there were many gods and Buddhas in the sky, not all of them could fight. Each of them was very powerful. For example, Manjushri Bodhisattva was famous for not being able to fight. He was a civil servant among the Bodhisattvas. For example, Samantabhadra Bodhisattva was also famous for his wisdom. He won with the wisdom of the Buddhist Dharma instead of fighting. Suddenly, they were a little flustered in the face of the fierce counterattack of the mystical silver fox. Not only them, but also the 500 arhats and 3,000 vajras had different cultivations. Some of them were able to deal with the attacks of the mystical silver fox with ease, while others were even beaten by the avatars of the mystical silver fox. Only the Buddha, who was sitting on the lotus throne, and the great ancestors of the three pure ones, who were riding divine beasts and standing on the golden steps, released the divine light around them and immediately shattered the avatars of the mystical silver fox. They were not harmed at all. The Buddha, who was sitting on the lotus throne, saw that his disciple had been caught off guard by the mystical silver fox. The scene was chaotic. He didn't say a word. He just lowered his head, turned his wrist, opened his 5 fingers, and slapped down on the mystical silver fox. At that time, the traveling monk's son had made a mess in the heavenly palace and made all the gods and Buddhas flee in all directions. Only the Tathagata Buddha had slapped the lawless and powerful traveling monk's son to the foot of the 5 Elements mountain for 500 years. Now the Buddha slapped down again. Everyone saw a huge golden palm in the sky falling toward the mystical silver fox. This golden palm was so thick and heavy that it was like a huge palm of a real person. The flesh and blood seemed to be clearly visible, and the palm lines in the palm could be clearly counted. This palm almost emptied all the air between heaven and earth, so that the mystical silver fox could hardly breathe and couldn't even open her eyes. The mystical silver fox took a deep breath, and the 9 golden fox tails behind her rushed up to meet the huge Tathagata Buddha's palm. With a loud bang, the world trembled violently. Everyone saw the 9 golden fox tails colliding with the Tathagata Buddha's palm. At first, the 9 fox tails could still stand straight against the Tathagata Buddha's palm, but soon the huge Buddha's palm pressed down bit by bit, only making the 9 fox tails bend and curl up bit by bit. The mystical silver fox couldn't help but tremble slightly. She saw that her invincible 9 golden fox tails were being pressed down on her head by the huge Tathagata Buddha's palm. She knew that as long as the Buddha's palm hit her head, she would immediately turn into a pile of meat paste. The Buddha would never give her a chance to wake up like he did to the traveling monk Sunday. At this moment, the mystical silver fox let out a loud shout, and the blood and chi in her body surged to the extreme. All the strength in her body burst out in an instant, and the 9 fox tails pierced through the huge Tathagata Buddha's palm like an unsheathed sword. Then she turned around, and the 9 fox tails seemed to shatter the Buddha's palm into countless pieces in an instant. Everyone saw that the mystical silver fox seemed to be in danger of being crushed by the Tathagata Buddha's palm in the last second, but the next second, the mystical silver fox tore the Buddha's palm into pieces like a piece of paper. The speed of the situation's reversal was really stunning. However, the mystical silver fox also knew that she was suffering. Her body trembled slightly, and her hands and feet were out of control because of the rapid consumption of Xueqi. She knew that she was already a little exhausted after this. If it had been a cultivator from another sect, he would have been shocked by the divine power of the mystical silver fox at this time. Not to mention attacking her, he was afraid that if he dared to look at her directly, he would already be extremely bold. But after all, the opponent the mystical silver fox was facing at this time was not a mortal, but the Buddha, the 3 pure ones. At the moment when the mystical silver fox showed her fatigue, the gods and Buddhas in the sky and the great ancestors of the 3 pure ones attacked at the same time. Countless magic treasures and magic arts in the sky rushed towards the mystical silver fox like stormy waves. For a moment, there was almost no figure or cloud in the sky. It was densely packed with all kinds of magic treasures and magic arts. The mystical silver fox was instantly engulfed by all kinds of brilliance. Then there was a loud bang in the sky, as if the end of the world was coming. Li Jiandong looked at the sky in a daze. He was a true god's Dharmakaya. Others could not see the situation in the huge explosion, but he could see clearly that the 9 golden tails of the mystical silver fox were tightly wrapped around her, like a huge ball. When she was in Xueqi, the mystical silver fox had faced the fierce attacks of all kinds of magic treasures in the cultivation world of the Middle Sun. She had resisted all the magic treasures with her 7 golden tails. But at this time, Li Jiandong clearly saw that under the joint attack of the gods and Buddhas in the sky and the great ancestors of the 3 pure ones, the bright foxtails had also become dim. The soft and shiny fur had also become dry and curly, and the round spherical foxtails had sunk little by little. Li Jiandong's eyes widened. The image of the mystical silver fox being bombarded was reflected in his pupils. The 9 golden tails fell one by one, and finally, the figure of a delicate and beautiful woman was revealed. The woman had a petite and pretty face. Her body was trembling in mid-air, and blood kept flowing out from the corners of her mouth. It seemed that she would fall from mid-air in the next second, but she still looked at the sky stubbornly. Then her body shook and she fell from the sky. Li Yundong looked at the woman who kept rolling and falling in mid-air. He watched the familiar face fall bit by bit in front of his eyes. His heart felt as if it had been suddenly squeezed by someone, making him unable to breathe. At this moment, Li Jiandong looked at the falling woman and suddenly saw himself. There was a trace of a very familiar look in her eyes. It was sad, as if she was saying, "Yundong, run away together." Suddenly, there seemed to be a bubble in Li Jiandong's body that had been pushed to his chest. It was getting bigger and bigger, and finally it burst with a pop. The blood in his body suddenly boiled and burst out. At this moment, Li Jiandong clearly felt that the woman who was constantly falling was no longer the mystical silver fox. She was clearly his girl, his Su Chan. At this time, all kinds of magic treasures and magic of the gods and Buddhas in the sky once again slapped toward the falling 9-tailed celestial fox. Li Jiandong couldn't bear it any longer. He let out an earth-shattering roar, "Stop, all of you, stop!" Li Jiandong rushed to the fallen mystical silver fox in an instant and held her in his arms. He looked at the familiar face in his arms, which was full of pain, and the corners of her mouth were stained with blood. His heart ached so much that it was almost torn apart. Li Jiandong stretched out his trembling hand and carefully wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth for his girl. There was an uncontrollable force in his body. He looked at the gods and Buddhas in the sky with blood-red eyes and roared angrily, "Whoever dares to do anything to her again, even if you are Buddha Tathagata or the old ancestor of the 3 pure ones, I will kill you without mercy." It's even later. Sorry, this is the update on the 3rd. Chapter 935. Li Yundong's roar shook the sky, and in an instant, the world was silent. All the cultivators of the Zhongri sect were shocked. They couldn't believe their ears. The immovable Wisdom King was the incarnation of Buddha's anger. He actually said to Buddha Tathagata, "Even if you are Buddha Tathagata, even if you are the old ancestor of the 3 pure ones, I will kill you without mercy." Was Li Yundong crazy? That was Buddha Tathagata. His power came from the Buddha himself. Wasn't he afraid that all the gods and Buddhas would beat him back to his original state? Isi Shenguang and Isi Chuyun looked at Li Yundong with their mouths agape. They couldn't imagine or understand Li Yundong's behavior at all. Before World War II, Japan was a very religious country. Even after World War II, the emperor was pulled down from the throne, but religion still had a deep impact on the lives of the Japanese. The power of the major cultivation sects in Japan was still passed down through the family. Cultivators like Ise Shenguang and Ise Chuyun were equivalent to inner disciples like Zi Yuan, Ruan Hongling, and Mao Yuchong. They were destined to be cultivators from the moment they were born. Therefore, great priests and goddesses like them were deeply rooted in the service and belief of the sect. They could not imagine that one day they would shout at Amaterasu, "No matter if you are Amaterasu or Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva, I will kill you without mercy." Ise Shenguang opened his mouth and said in a strange voice, "Wisdom King. Is he crazy?" Ise Jun also stared at the sky in a daze. She had been cultivating since she was a child and didn't understand any so-called love in the world at all. Therefore, she couldn't understand why Li Yundong would resolutely become enemies with all the gods and Buddhas in the world for the sake of the mystical silver fox and resolutely fall out with the Buddha. Ise Chuyun's iceberg-like heart suddenly trembled. Her eyes were fixed on the burly man in the sky, who was holding a delicate body in his arms. She suddenly felt that this man was even taller than the gods and Buddhas in the sky. But this thought was only for a moment. Soon, she sighed softly and said, "I'm afraid that Wisdom King is going to kill himself." Li Yundong's Dharmakaya of Wisdom King came from Buddha Tathagata. But he had now broken up with Buddha Tathagata in public. If Buddha Tathagata took back the power of Wisdom King, no matter how powerful Li Yundong was, he would definitely not be a match for all the gods and Buddhas in the sky and the old ancestors of the three pure ones. Li Yundong had definitely shocked the cultivators of Zhongri. He had shaken the hearts of Zhou Qin and Zi Yuan, and had even made the gods and Buddhas of heaven furious. When Buddha Tathagata heard Li Yundong's words, he didn't move for a while. However, the four bodhisattvas, Manjushri, Samantabhadra, Ksitagarbha, and Guanyin, were furious. 500 arhats and 3,000 vajras smashed the powerful magical weapons and magic in their hands at Li Yundong. Li Yundong didn't hesitate. With a backhand, he protected the girl in his arms behind him. With the other hand, he pinched a Mahamudra with one hand. With a roar, he slapped at the magic weapons all over the sky. The power of this palm was no less than that of the Tathagata Buddha, who had slapped the mystical silver fox before. Everyone saw a huge golden palm suddenly appear in the sky. This palm stood in mid-air, like a golden Buddha wall. Countless magic arts and magic treasures bombarded it, only creating waves of golden waves. It was like a clay ox sinking into the sea, and there was no more movement. Li Yundong raised his palm, and a continuous stream of blue qi rose from the top of his head. This qi floated in the air and immediately turned into the image of a movable Wisdom King. His whole body was blue and black, and his whole body was covered with blue flames. He had 3 heads and 6 arms. Li Yundong's true god Fazhen sat cross-legged in the air, with all 6 arms pinching his fingers. His left and right eyes were closed, and he was reciting Buddhist scriptures. However, the vertical eye between his eyebrows was open, and there was an angry blue flame in it. The Fazhen of a movable Wisdom King sat upright in the air, holding 3 Mahamudra, namely the Dharma Boundary Seal, the Vajra World Samadhi Seal, and the immovable Wisdom King Fundamental Seal. These 3 Mahamudra stood in front of him, like a natural chasm. No matter how fiercely the powerful magical weapons and magic skills of the gods and Buddhas attacked, they could not break through the barrier at all. Speaking of which, although the 4 bodhisattvas, 500 arhats, and 3,000 vajras were all gods, each of them had different responsibilities and abilities, so their spiritual power was also different. Some of them existed to enlighten the world, while others existed to save all living beings. However, immovable Wisdom King was a god created by Buddha to resist demons and evil spirits. They represented the highest and strongest power in the Buddhist cultivation world. Although the 4 bodhisattvas, 500 arhats, and 3,000 vajras were also powerful, compared with immovable Wisdom King, who specialized in fighting, it was equivalent to the police in charge of the security of the community meeting the special forces that specialized in fighting in the most dangerous and difficult environment. Their strength was not on the same level at all. Li Yundong's Wisdom King's Fazhen remained motionless under the siege of all the gods and Buddhas. Although the great ancestors of the 3 pure ones stood on the golden stair jade platform and watched indifferently, this amazing scene still shocked everyone in the cultivation world of Zhongri. They hadn't expected that Li Yundong would be so strong that he could fight against so many gods and Buddhas by himself. There were even desperate cultivators who said in a trembling voice, "Is a movable Wisdom King going to turn against the devil? Has the decline of the Tao and the growth of the devil reached such a point?" At this time, many cultivators shouted loudly, "Buddha, do you want to watch the true Dharma of the world die out?" Their voices were like waves, and even the deafening explosions in the sky could not stop them. Seated high on the 9-tiered lotus throne, the Gautama Buddha was high up in the clouds. No one knew what kind of expression the Gautama Buddha would have when he saw his strongest general brazenly rebelling. All they saw was the Gautama Buddha remaining silent. But not long after, a distant Buddhist chant came from the distant horizon again. This time, everyone only heard a Buddha's voice, and 4 figures slowly appeared in the clouds. The leader was a man with 3 heads and 8 arms, holding various weapons in his hands, carrying flames on his back, and stepping on the Mahasvara. He was Trailokaya Vijaya, the second of the 5 wisdom kings who had conquered greed, anger, obsession, and the 3 worlds. The second figure who appeared was green all over. His eyes were red, and his hair was black and red, like samadhi flames. His huge eyes were as big as bells, and his body was entwined with two-headed snakes. He held a Vajra pestle in one hand, and his other hands were full of wish prints and karma prints. The flames around him were like moons. He was sitting cross-legged on the green lotus-colored stone throne, looking majestic. He was Junchali Wisdom King, who could subdue the 5 Een devils. Another figure was also green and black, with 6 faces, 6 arms, and 6 feet. He was sitting on the rustling stone throne with flames on his back. His 6 arms were holding halberds, bows, ropes, swords, arrows, sticks, and other weapons. He was Mahavira Wisdom King, who could subdue demons among humans. The last figure to appear was a man with 3 faces, 6 arms and 5 angry eyes. He was covered with treasures and accessories, and his body was burning with flames like tribulation fire. He was holding a Vajra pestle, a Vajra bell, a longbow, a sharp sword, and other weapons. He was Mahavira Wisdom King, who could subdue demons among humans. As soon as the 4 Wisdom Kings appeared, the pressure on Li Yundong immediately doubled. Although Li Yundong was the leader of the 5 Wisdom Kings under Buddha and could subdue all demons, unlike the other 4 Wisdom Kings, who could only subdue some demons, if the other 4 Wisdom Kings joined forces, the outcome would be unpredictable. Everyone saw that as soon as the 4 Wisdom Kings appeared, the Vajra pestle in each of their hands struck at Li Yundong like thunder. At the same time, they plucked the bowstrings in their hands. Every time the bowstrings buzzed, a sharp arrow of light shot out and bombarded the Mahamudra in front of Li Yundong. Although there were only 4 of them, the sound of the bowstrings being pulled was as dense as 10,000 people pulling the bowstrings at the same time. The flying arrows falling from the sky were as dense as rain, covering the sky and the sun. The power of the Vajra pestle was so strong that it even squeezed the surrounding air to distort and deform. It was as if the world would collapse with one pestle. Li Yundong saw that the 4 Wisdom Kings had appeared at the same time and were attacking him without saying a word. He shouted angrily, and the Wisdom King's Fazhen waved the Vajra Wisdom Sword and the Vajra Silk Rope to meet the rain of arrows and the ferocious thunder-like Vajra pestle. Everyone watched as the 5 Wisdom Monarchs fought in midair, causing the heavens to shake and the earth to tremble. Brilliant light shone everywhere, and the 5 figures in the sky would occasionally wrestle with each other. Sometimes they would fly far away from each other, and then they would use all sorts of hand seals and treasures to attack each other. They were dumbfounded and dazzled. It was as if the Battle of Susano had turned into a child's play. As the saying goes, when the immortals fight, the mortals suffer. Many cultivators couldn't withstand the power of the 5 Wisdom Kings fighting in mid-air. They covered their chests in pain and fell to the ground. The divine power of the 5 Wisdom Kings was too amazing. Every time their power collided, it could almost instantly suck out the surrounding air, causing the cultivators in the field to be in extreme pain. They felt as if there was a huge rock pressing on their chests. Li Yundong was fighting against 4 people. Although he was the leader of the 5 Wisdom Kings, it was still extremely difficult for him. He gritted his teeth tightly. His eyes widened, the corners of his eyes cracked, and the corners of his mouth oozed blood. His spiritual energy was far higher than any of the 4 Wisdom Kings, but he was fighting against the 4 Wisdom Kings alone. It was difficult for him to fight against them with 2 fists. Zhou Qin and Zi Yuan watched the earth-shattering battle from afar. They were so nervous that their palms were full of sweat. They stared with their eyes wide open and didn't dare to say a word. They didn't even dare to breathe too loudly, for fear that they would disturb Li Yundong and distract him. But at this moment, the mystical silver fox behind Li Yundong came to her senses. Although she had been seriously injured before, her mind was still clear. She knew that Li Yundong had become enemies with all the gods and Buddhas for Suchan, and had even resolutely broken up with Buddha Tathagata. The mystical silver fox looked at Li Yundong in shock. She couldn't believe that there was really a man in the world who was willing to give up everything for the woman he loved. The mystical silver fox stared at Li Yundong, who was fighting alone. She suddenly said in a daze, "Li Yundong, do you really want to save Suchan so much?" This sentence immediately hit Li Yundong's softest point. His body trembled violently, and the Dharmakaya of Wisdom King sitting high in the clouds shook violently. In an instant, the golden body shattered. The countless sharp arrows and vajra of the 4 great Wisdom Kings suddenly shattered the Dharmakaya of a movable Wisdom King. Li Yundong roared and fell from the sky. Chapter 936. Li Yundong's Wisdom King's Dharmakaya was instantly smashed into countless pieces from the air, and he himself was also knocked down from the air. The simultaneous attack of the 4 Wisdom Kings was too fierce, so Li Yundong was immediately seriously injured when he was slightly distracted. However, the immovable Wisdom King was the leader of the 5 Wisdom Kings after all. Although his Dharmakaya had been defeated, the bow, arrow, and vajra above Li Yundong's head were like a storm. In the next second, the Dharmakaya of Wisdom King Zhong immediately gathered again, turning into a mighty and fierce vajra posture that could not be moved by the wind. His 6 arms once again pinched out a Mahamudra, like an immovable mountain, blocking the overwhelming attack in front of Li Yundong. In the distance, everyone could only see a sea of blazing blue fire. Arrows fell like rain, and the arrows were like flying locusts. The sky was almost covered by the rain of arrows. Even the gods and Buddhas could not see their figures. They could only vaguely make out the 4 Wisdom Kings with many faces and arms quickly plucking the bowstrings. Every time they plucked the bowstring, a golden arrow of light would shoot out from the empty bowstring. However, as soon as the arrow of light flew out, it would split into 2, then 4, and by the time it flew into the air, it was already a golden rain of arrows. All the deities and Buddhas knew that the immovable Wisdom King was the king of all Wisdom Kings. He could destroy all demons and devils. He could destroy all obstacles. His strength was so great that it could shake the heavens and the earth. If he were to fight one-on-one with the other Wisdom Kings, the immovable Wisdom King could defeat them effortlessly. Therefore, the 4 Wisdom Kings joined forces to attack Li Yundong. On the one hand, they used the rain of arrows like continuous spider silk to stick Li Yundong in place, making him unable to exert his amazing power. On the other hand, the real trump card was the Vajra scepter and the Vajra sword in the hands of the 4 Wisdom Kings. These Vajra pestle were extremely powerful. Often, a mountain could be smashed into powder with one pestle. Every time the golden wall of the Mahamudra made by Li Yundong's Wisdom King's Fa's hen was smashed, it would tremble violently, and countless cracks would appear on it in an instant. Then, the Vajra sword that was slashing down represented the power of Buddhism to destroy all demons and evil spirits. Every time the sword fell, it would cut into these cracks. Like a mountain-splitting axe, it chiseled the golden wall in front of Li Yundong little by little. Ruan Hongling and Lin Miao, who were in the stone chamber, also looked at the sky in a daze. Their eyes reflected the blue flame. In the flame, Akalanatha was sitting in the air, surrounded by a rain of swords, as if he was in hell. At this moment, their minds were completely blank. There was only one thought lingering in their minds. Was the invincible Li Yundong going to fall just like that? Xueqi and Zi Yuan watched as the golden city wall formed by countless big handprints was gradually smashed by the Vajra pestle and cut into pieces by the Vajra sword. They were even more frightened, like ants on a hot pan. They wanted to help, but they didn't know where to start. As the saying went, when deities fought, mortals suffered. Even though they were lightning tribulation experts, they were still insignificant mortals before the 5 Wisdom Kings. They couldn't even get close to them, let alone help them. The raging blue hellfire around Li Yundong would burn them to ashes. What should we do? What should we do? Xueqi was so anxious that her beautiful face turned pale. She bit the corner of her mouth so hard that blood dripped from it. Zi Yuan also fixed her eyes on Li Yundong. She clenched her fists and her body trembled slightly. The fairy, who was usually calm and composed, had completely lost her calm appearance. Her eyes were filled with pain and struggle, confusion and anxiety. Li Yundong only felt that he could not see anything under the pressure of the storm of arrows. Although he could feel that his strength was still strong, he was concerned about what the mystical silver fox had said to him before. Li Yundong managed to free up part of his strength. He turned his head and said to the mystical silver fox, "Mystical silver fox, what do you mean by what you just said? Are you willing to return Su Chan to me?" The mystical silver fox fixed her eyes on Li Yundong. Her eyes were incomparably complicated as she said slowly, "Wisdom King, if you can agree to my conditions, I will return Su Chan's soul and body to you." Li Yundong was ecstatic. What conditions? The mystical silver fox pointed to the gods and Buddhas all over the sky and sneered, "Kill all these hypocritical gods and Buddhas." Li Yundong's whole body shook, and his ecstatic face gradually froze. His eyes hesitated and struggled. He looked at the extremely familiar and beautiful face in front of him, and images involuntarily appeared in his mind one after another. He vaguely remembered that when he and the little girl knew each other and fell in love, the little girl had once snuggled up to him and said, "When you are rich and powerful in the future, will you dislike me?" What did he say at that time? "Ah, yes," he had asked with a smile. "If there is a rich and handsome man in front of you in the future, will you leave me?" Along the way, the two of them had experienced countless hardships and tests. Li Yundong clearly remembered that in the taxi, the little girl had held the piggy bank tightly, for fear of losing even a little money in it. It was as if she lost the money, she would lose herself. But when he really needed money, the little lass didn't hesitate to take out all her savings. The piggy bank that she treated like a treasure was also smashed by her without hesitation. She took out the insignificant amount of savings and handed it to him, just so that he wouldn't despise her, look down on her, and don't leave her. These images echoed in Li Yundong's mind. The familiar face in front of him gradually merged with the image of the little girl in his heart. A trace of tenderness gradually appeared on his face. He recalled his promise to the little girl. "No matter what you become, I will not dislike you and I will not leave you." The little girl had accompanied him all the way. She had fulfilled her promise. Now it was time for him to fulfill his promise. Li Yundong's eyes were infatuated and unreal. At this time, the figure of the mystical silver fox was no longer in his eyes. There was only the figure of the little girl standing in front of him like a dream. He murmured as if he was talking in a dream, "Yes. I won't dislike you. You didn't leave me at that time. How could I abandon you at this time? I will wait for you to come back. Chonner, wait for me. It'll be fine in a moment. It'll be fine in a moment." As Li Yundong spoke, his internal organs began to run wildly. The aura in his body rose unprecedentedly, and his qi and blood began to burn like flames. Everyone saw that Li Yundong's body was also boiling with blazing blue flames. His hands slowly began to make a seal. It was the most powerful and longest seal of the mantra Mahamudra, the Amitabha Buddha seal. Li Yundong made a hand seal and recited the mantra. Every time a mantra came out of his mouth, his Wisdom King's Fa's hen became stronger and thicker. The golden Buddha wall in front of him, which had been on the verge of collapse, also became thicker and taller, towering like a golden mountain. The four Wisdom Kings, who had been suppressing Li Yundong and attacking fiercely, became more and more crazy at this time. Their attacks became more and more fierce, but the blue flames around Li Yundong's body surged up like a tide. No matter how fierce the arrows in the sky were, they couldn't extinguish the blue sea of fire that was rushing up. At this time, the people of the cultivation world of China at the foot of the mountain were also stunned. Many of them were so shocked that they couldn't help but whisper, "Oh my God, does Li Yundong really want to go against the heaven?" They could all feel that Li Yundong was burning his own life as the price, pouring all his magical power and zhenqi into this heaven-defying attack. The outcome of this battle, life and death, would be decided at this moment. For a moment, the world was extremely quiet, and only the sound of the mantra Mahamudra could be heard. When Li Yundong recited the last sentence, begging for pregnancy, Shaha. When he said the mantra, there was a loud bang. The Amitabha Buddha seal formed by Li Yundong's Wisdom King's Dharmakaya slapped toward the sky from the bottom up. At first, the Mahamudra was only the size of a door, but as soon as it flew out, it kept growing and becoming as big as a mountain. When it flew close to the clouds, it had already covered the sky and the sun, almost covering the figures of all the gods, Buddhas, and the patriarchs of the three pure ones. The moment the Mahamudra touched the four Wisdom Kings, a burst of white light that made people blind suddenly bloomed. The world was as bright as day. Even a top expert like the mystical silver fox couldn't help but turn her head and narrow her eyes. This burst of white light was extremely blazing, like a raging wave, reverberating and rolling in the air. Everyone could only hear a rumbling sound, like 100,000 thunderclaps exploding one after another, or like hundreds of millions of volcanoes erupting at the same time. Many cultivators were deafened in an instant, and their eyes were temporarily blinded by the piercing light. Some of them were even knocked to the ground, curling up into a ball, trembling, and unconscious. After an unknown period of time, when the burst of white light passed, some cultivators with high cultivation dared to turn their faces and open their eyes in horror to look at the sky. They saw that the sky was blue and clear. The golden stepped jade platform, the patriarchs of the three pure ones, the auspicious clouds, the lotus flowers, and the gods and Buddhas had all disappeared. It was as if they had been flowers in a mirror and the moon in the water from beginning to end. Li Yundong's palm had shattered all these flowers in a mirror and the moon in the water. Only Li Yundong was alone in the air. His Wisdom King's Fa's hen slowly scattered, and the blue hellfire disappeared little by little. His body swayed, as if he would fall in the next second. The qi and blood in Li Yundong's body were tumbling. He spat out a mouthful of blood and his body suddenly fell down. Zhou Qin and Zi Yuan were so shocked that they exclaimed and subconsciously wanted to go forward. But at this time, Li Yundong stopped abruptly. He wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, forced a smile and said weakly, "Mystical Silver Fox, it's time for you to fulfill your promise." The mystical Silver Fox looked at Li Yundong in shock. She hadn't expected that Li Yundong's heaven-defying palm would disperse all the gods and Buddhas in the sky. Even the patriarchs of the 3 pure ones, the 4 wisdom kings, the 4 great bodhisattvas, the 500 arhats, and the 3,000 vajras were not willing to face this heaven-defying blow. Although she knew that Li Yundong was so weak that she could poke him down with one finger, as the saying goes, a tiger will not fall down. At this time, in the eyes of the mystical Silver Fox, Li Yundong was unprecedentedly powerful and lofty. She looked at Li Yundong with a complicated look in her eyes. After a moment of silence she slowly said, "I can fulfill my promise, but before that, I want to know one thing." Li Yundong took a deep breath and said tiredly, "What is it?" You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.